Newsroom. The second presidential debate begins in just 30 minutes. President Obama and Mitt Romney will be taking questions directly from voters in their second of 3 meetings. White House correspondent Jackie Calmes and Romney reporter Michael Barbaro are here with a preview. So Jackie, even the White House and the Obama campaign will admit that the pressure is on the president tonight to perform. What do they think they can do to change the narrative, to change the momentum?
Well, it is the inverse of what we had 2 weeks ago. What he needs to do is stand out there and look like a leader to be able to both defend his record of the past 4 years and present a vision for the future as to what he will be doing that will, give people a reason to think things will be better.
And Michael, does the Romney campaign feel like they just have to fight this one to a draw, that he can sort of do the do no harm routine tonight?
Before I get to Romney, though, I want to add that what Obama needs to do is to make Americans think that where there was not some sort of Energizer battery in the back of their president the last debate, that like it's been recharged.
Like, he just had a bad night.
Right. I think that's a pretty low bar. You know what's interesting about Governor Romney's burden, and it's very different, is that they feel quite liberated by his performance last time. A lot of the repair work, the basic task of making him seem not, as they say, not like a devil, not like this kind of cold-hearted capitalist that a lot of people were prepared for because of the Democratic attacks of the last year. That part has been met. That burden has been largely satisfied for now, and that gives them a chance to do a lot of other interesting stuff, to begin to make a very strong case for the small government that he wants to see, for tax cuts, to begin to really sell a Romney vision, which I think most Americans don't quite have a hold of yet, because there's been a lot of distractions in his way.
No. The president has to. Did you want to say something?
Well, one of the reasons that Mitt Romney was able to come off the last time as not looking like the plutocrat that the Obama campaign had sort of pictured him as in a bunch of very expensive ads over the summer was that President Obama let him go scot-free. For instance, there was Mitt Romney's reference to how he'd fire his accountant or get a new accountant.
Yeah.
And it just went by. I mean, that would have been a perfect place for President Obama.
That was one right over the plate, really.
Exactly.
Now, there's a big appetite for the president to show more, not just energy, but actual fight tonight than he showed last time. This is not necessarily a format that lends itself toward sort of an aggressive presentation. So how do they thread that needle? How do they show some real combativeness without being combative?
I actually think this has the potential. I think it could be both good for both candidates, but for President Obama, it actually, if he uses his time well, could work well because it's a format that you have to show empathy. I mean, that word's becoming overused.
And that's his greatest characteristic with the public,
when he's
right?
on.
That's his big advantage, right?
Yeah, when he's on. But the advantage for him is that he can take a question from the audience and he can look that audience member in the eye and direct at that audience member his message about what he would do versus what his opponent would do without having to look Mitt Romney in the eye and sort of as he's implicitly criticizing him or explicitly. And it sort of allows him to make his point without looking, I don't know, what he was trying to avoid looking the last time is to, condescending, arrogant, conceited.
Here I think Mitt Romney will surprise people once again because that A student always does 6 more hours of homework than just about anybody else. And what we know from our reporting is that about 6 months ago, Governor Romney's staff began putting together these kind of secretive, off-the-record meetings with voters, round tables. They had 2 goals. One, quite honestly, was to give him some anecdotes to work with, to hear people out, hear about their bankruptcies and foreclosures, and to give him some raw material. But the second thing they wanted to do was to make him comfortable in an environment where if he made a gaffe, it didn't matter because there were never reporters around, really listening to people, interacting with them, getting him into that complicated back and forth with somebody who's lost a home, lost a child, is in a really bad situation that he's always struggled to relate to. So I think he's going to be very, very good tonight because he's got that training now.
In observed town halls, though, Michael, when you've seen him on the trail, does he do that? Does he make eye contact with voters? Is he good at taking those kinds of questions? Is he good at sort of showing empathy one-on-one on the trail in a way that he hasn't quite conveyed through the TV screens yet?
He can. At times, I mean, there's
sounds like the
that's
answer
a very qualified answer.
Well, that frozen smile that he offered when Barack Obama spoke, that'll be on his face when he's listening to someone talk, and he will occasionally make a joke that will just feel all sorts of wrong, but he does have a capacity now to absorb what people are saying in a very empathetic way and be quite responsive. That's much improved from the Mitt Romney we saw at the very beginning of the campaign.
Thanks, guys. We'll be back in a little while. Tonight's debate presents the only opportunity for voters to question the candidates directly. But while the format's being presented as an open discussion with undecided voters, organizers have left very little to chance.
This is Jeremy Peters for the New York Times. Days before tonight's town hall debate, crews transformed Hofstra University's basketball court from a 5,000-seat arena to an intimate stage that will welcome a carefully selected group of undecided voters. But it is hardly the forum for open debate historically associated with town hall meetings. Each moment is carefully controlled and choreographed, from the lighting to the questions to the participants themselves.
We have the Gallup organization, the experts in polling, trying to identify uncommitted voters from Nassau County. They make calls to landlines and cell phones and identify these individuals who, after a pretty rigorous screening process, will become the 80 individuals to make up the audience.
Those who are chosen spend all of Tuesday on campus, prepping for the debate at technical rehearsals and meetings with the moderator. Only about a dozen of them will get to step up to the microphone, and who it will be is a closely held surprise until their names are called. Organizers work hard to keep the selected voters and their questions far from the reach of the press and the campaigns, so that the candidates' answers will be spontaneous.
We create separate hallways to make sure that the town hall participants are sequestered until they go on the stage on Tuesday night. So they would come in this way and then walk right up into the stage.
George Farah, a critic of modern presidential debates, says the last truly authentic exchange between voters and the candidates was back in 1992.
One of the questions asked was of President George H.W. Bush, and they asked him, how does the federal deficit affect you personally? He stumbled. He struggled with the question.
Obviously, it has a lot to do with interest rates. It has.
She's saying you personally.
On a personal basis, how has it affected you?
Has it affected you personally?
Well, I'm sure it has. I love my grandchildren. I want to think
How?
that.
Under the contract for tonight's debate, participants will not be allowed any follow-ups. In fact, their mics are shut off after they ask their question. And all questions are pre-selected by the moderator.
We're doing this for television, so there does need to be some order to it in order to make sure that it works from a production standpoint. So it is fairly strictly organized, and that's the role of the moderator. Candy Crowley has a lot to get through and a very significant responsibility.
Crowley has been under pressure from both campaigns to minimize her participation.
To me, this is going to be sort of an organic thing. On that morning is when I first see what these questions are. These people are going to arrive with 3-4 questions that they are interested in, right? So I'm going to see them. I know what they are, and you have to figure out which ones will go together to make a conversation.
Keeping the conversation going and helping the audience participation feel real makes for good television. And it may help some voters make up their minds along the way.
Jeremy Peters is here now with more. So Jeremy, obviously the campaigns have gone to great lengths to control this event, but they can't totally eliminate the possibility of sort of an unexpected voter encounter, and those can play either really well or really, really, really badly.
Spontaneity is something that the campaigns, like when it goes really well for them, like when Obama was recently given a bear hug by that big guy.
Which of course
lifted
people
up off the
believe
floor.
was not spontaneous because it seemed too positive for him.
Right, so it can be good in that instance, or it can be really awkward, like the time that Mitt Romney was accosted by a gay veteran at a diner about his stance on gay rights. So there's these audience members are so carefully selected and the questions are so carefully pre-screened that the likelihood for anything like that to happen is probably pretty minimal, but you never know when somebody's going to go off script.
They've actually even really done all these limitations on sort of the personal space. They can only get so close to each other or so close to the audience. The podiums have to be a certain height.
Right, well remember one of the most awkward moments in debate history was when Al Gore walked up and got uncomfortably close to George Bush, who kind of gave him this puzzled grimace that made everybody laugh, and it ended up making Al Gore look, once again, the punchline of some late-night comedian jokes.
What happens if one of these very carefully pre-screened questioners gets up and asks a question that was not the question they were supposed to ask?
Well, there's really nothing that the moderator can do about it. I mean, she's not going to say, sit back down. That's not the question that you put on your note card. So, I mean, this is live television, right? I mean, these people who've been moderating the debates have been doing it for decades. They're very skilled. They know how to take curveballs. So I don't think that we have to probably worry about Candy Crowley being able to handle herself.
Let's talk about Candy Crowley and the moderators here. There's, at least in my memory, never been a debate cycle where the moderator has been so much a subject of debate as the debate itself or the candidates. It really is unprecedented, isn't it?
Well, it's unlike anything I can ever remember, and these people have become political punching bags in a way that, after Jim Lehrer, who kind of was widely criticized for not being assertive enough in the debate, if you were to listen to how he was received on Fox News, this is a debate that was widely perceived to have been won by Romney, he was praised. You flip over a week later to the coverage on Fox News of Martha Raddatz, who after Biden was widely believed to have won that debate, and Martha Raddatz got criticized. So there's something in it for everybody to see what they want.
Now, there's been a flap about Candy Crowley in particular this week about what her role in this debate was supposed to be, and about the campaign's not really wanting her to have any real journalistic role, to ask follow-up questions, to really be anything more than a conduit for the questioners and the audience. She's pushed back on that. What do you think we're going to see from her tonight?
Well, I mean, the fact of the matter is, the campaigns can request anything they want of the moderator, but it's not up to them. I mean, they could put in the contract that Candy Crowley is not allowed to sit down or take a sip of water, but she's going to do what she wants. It's kind of it reminds me of these riders that celebrities have who
only green M&Ms
during concerts, yeah. Exactly, like only Evian water and green M&Ms, right? But ultimately, like, Candy's a journalist. She's going to ask questions when she sees fit.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. National political correspondent Jeff Zeleny is one of the reporters tasked with writing the lead story for tomorrow's paper. He's standing by with assistant managing editor Rick Burke. Rick?
Jeff, I know you're prepared for tonight. I saw you go out and bought a jar of peanuts for everyone, so we're ready for the big event. Now, you've been covering Obama for many years. You were at the Chicago Tribune. You covered him as a state senator briefly. So you've seen him under pressure in these tough situations, and what we've been hearing for a week now is this is a big, tough night for him. What might we expect?
I think there's no doubt that he is under a lot of pressure. We saw in the 2007-2008 campaign that he is sort of a fourth quarter player. He would sit around a lot in his long primary season with Hillary Clinton, and he wouldn't necessarily focus or engage until really the last minute, and sometimes his aides were so concerned and nervous that he wasn't really sort of drilling down on things. But he always seemed to prevail in the end. So, but they're wondering now if he still has it within him to do that. And one thing that's different now is he has all this stuff in his head from being president, all these facts, all his record, everything else going on. So it's harder to just distill, and it's harder for him to become a presidential candidate because he is the president. So that's what his advisors say is the hardest sort of transition for him, is to sort of forget for a night that you're the president and just be a candidate.
Does that relate at all to that telling quote he gave a few months ago where he wished he had explained himself better as president? Is it partly the narrative not knowing how to explain his actions and his accomplishments?
I think that's probably a good part of it. I mean, he's a long-winded speaker. He's at his best when he's giving long speeches in front of big crowds. He's not good at sort of summarizing things up sort of quickly. So that's why he struggles during these debates. And we saw him in so many debates back in 2007, 2008. He frankly wasn't very good until the end. He was pretty good in his general election debates, but I would argue that Senator McCain was not as strong of a debater as we saw Governor Romney last week. So I think what he's been doing, he was sequestered for the weekend in Williamsburg, Virginia. A golf course was right outside his hotel, but he did not bring his clubs. He did not play. They made him sort of get down to business and work. So he's doing a couple things tonight. One, he's going to answer the questions directly from voters, but then sort of pivot and challenge Governor Romney. It's kind of a tricky step here. He can't come off as too hot, and he certainly can't come off as too cold as he did in the Denver debate.
But isn't the pressure's on where he knows everyone is watching to see his moves, and he doesn't want to overdo it, or he doesn't want to underdo it. So how do you calibrate it? And doesn't he have to make a splash in the first 15, 20 minutes before America turns the channel or the TV off?
I think he does at in the first sort of half of the debate, or the first half an hour of the debate, has to present himself as a different figure from the debater we saw a couple weeks ago in Denver. He has to sort of, connect with voters, which I think he will. He's pretty good at connecting with voters. It's the pivot to challenging Governor Romney that is more interestingly. But I agree with you. I mean, he at the beginning, he has to sort of show a different debating style than he did throughout the whole debate, throughout the whole 90
And
minutes.
let's turn it, we've heard so much about Obama. Let's now turn to Romney. As you're writing the lead story or co-writing it, what are you going to be looking for tonight from Romney?
I think one of the things we'll be looking at to see if his debate performance in Denver was an anomaly, or if this is sort of how he is. I mean, he has been holding practice sessions, we're told, with real people, ordinary voters, for months, trying to practice and prepare to connect with voters, but we still have seen so many awkward Mitt Romney moments. So I think what they're trying to do is not have any of these awkward moments, any of the awkward laughs that he has, sort of had throughout his campaign. But I mean, he is a strong debater, a good debater. I actually think that both of them will probably have fairly strong performances, and at the end, we may not be able to grade exactly who won or who lost. It may be more even, or maybe not. We'll see what the moderator does. I mean, a lot is in the moderator's hands here. Even though voters are asking the questions, the moderator can still really mix it up. And Candy Crowley, you've worked with her for years, I have too. I think she just may have that in her.
Right. And also, in terms of spin from both sides, how much have you gotten leading up to this debate in terms of expectations, in terms of people inundating you with facts and figures and telling you what's going to happen tonight?
I mean, quite a bit, and it's more expectation setting. I mean, at this point, the Obama campaign, it'd be hard to lower expectations because the president sort of did that for them a couple weeks ago. But the Romney campaign is trying to lower its expectations a bit and say, like, look, this is the president of the United States. He's a successful person. He takes questions from voters all the time. So I think it's more of an expectation setting thing. But right now, most of the facts of the case are sort of like built in. Our fact checkers obviously are always come up with something new, but I mean, most of the argument is already out there. I think a couple new things we'll hear tonight is Libya and Benghazi. Governor Romney probably will have his first chance to ask the president, sort of what did you know, what happened with the administration, and he can sort of, if someone in the audience asks that, he can sort of play off of that. So I'm guessing that will come up, and I think social issues will come up in a way that they haven't before.
Well, we will see soon enough. Jeff, we're going to let you go to your soundproof room so you're spin-free and you can watch it in peace, at least for the first hour or so.
Right.
And we'll check in with you later. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Now let's go to a package to see how health care might be affected by whoever's elected president in November.
Today, after all the votes have been tallied, health insurance reform becomes law in the United States of America.
This is Abby Goodenough, the healthcare reporter for the New York Times. When Americans go to the polls to select a president next month, they will also be choosing one of two profoundly different visions for the country's healthcare system.
They call it Obamacare. It's true, I care. It's true.
If Obama wins, the president's signature healthcare law will almost certainly come into full force, becoming the largest expansion of the social safety net since Lyndon Johnson's Great Society programs almost half a century ago.
That America must move forward.
As the law currently stands, most Americans will be required to have medical coverage by January 1st, 2014. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that 30 million uninsured people will eventually gain coverage. This will happen with the help of government subsidies and expanded Medicaid eligibility.
Thank you so much.
If Romney wins and Republicans capture the Senate, much of the law could be repealed or its financing cut back.
I will act to repeal Obamacare.
While Romney has been less specific about what he would put in place if the law were repealed, one proposal would create tax breaks for people to buy insurance on their own.
The best course for health care is to do what we did in my state, craft a plan at the state level that fits the needs of the state.
Romney has also said he would continue to guarantee access for people with pre-existing conditions, but that guarantee could exclude millions who have not maintained continuous coverage.
It's up to you whether we go back to the old healthcare system that let insurance companies decide when to cover you and when to cover you and drop you when you needed it most.
Passage of the Affordable Care Act in 2010 was, to many, Mr. Obama's most significant legislative accomplishment. But the law proved so divisive that undoing it has become a central of Republicans.
What a farce this bill is.
Meanwhile, Democrats hope to capitalize on the law's popularity with crucial voter groups such as young people, women, and Hispanics. And yet, after the election, Congress will be under intense pressure to rein in deficits and debt. There will be a renewed focus on the costs of Medicare, Medicaid, and the health care law. Even if Obama is reelected, political observers say the White House could negotiate a cost-saving compromise with Congress that could delay some of its biggest, most expensive provisions. But whether the president or Congress would be willing to even consider such a compromise remains an open question.
I'm here with our chief fact checker, Michael Cooper. Michael, how much has health care come up in the debates?
Oh, it's been a huge issue in the debates, and it's kept the fact checkers very busy. In the first presidential debate, Mitt Romney kind of suggested that while he would repeal President Obama's health care law, that he would replace it with something that would cover people with pre-existing conditions, which is one of the most popular parts of that law. And in fact, when you look at his real plan, in fact, you would have had to had continuous coverage to qualify for that. So that could have left millions of people without coverage. His proposal to overhaul the Medicare system is one of the most dramatic since the Great Society. And so the way both sides have talked about that has kept us plenty busy.
Right. Now, how are you preparing for tonight? Because it's a town hall format, and we'll have questions not from the moderator as much as so-called real people.
Well, we'll have everything that we've prepared for the previous two debates, but we also thought that regular voters might have a different set of questions. So, for instance, we have our economics reporter was looking up the price of groceries in case the candidates are asked that in an attempt to ferret out whether they're in touch with real people or not.
We'll see. It'll be interesting to see that. Now, what about? I've been asked this question. There's so much attention this campaign on fact checking and who's telling the truth or not. Do you think it's any different from past campaigns?
Well, I think we talk about it more, but I covered the last campaign 4 years ago, and we certainly wrote plenty of stories evaluating what candidates said, often on the front page, often calling balls and strikes. So I think reporters have always done that, but I think there's been a sort of a professionalization of the fact checker in the last 4 years, and that's led to a lot more discussion about it.
Is there any fact check you've done where you've had another news organization take a totally different take on it, where you thought, like, was I right, wrong here?
Sometimes, because there are lots of facts that are not exactly binary. There's lots of gray and spin, and so sometimes we'll come out on different sides of an issue. But in general, I think what we try to do is provide that extra context. So for us, it's not so much in a Roger Ebert thumbs up, thumbs down. Right. It's more, this is what you should really know about this issue.
Terrific. Michael, thanks very much. Megan?
Thanks, Rick. Assistant Managing Editor Jim Roberts is here now with social media editor Lexi Mainland to look at the evolving social media response to each of these debates. Jim?
Thanks, Megan. Lexi, I wanted to talk a little bit about a post that ran on the caucus blog earlier today that attempted to sort of raise the question, to what extent does social media, Twitter in particular, affect how people view the outcome of debates like tonight's?
Right. Well, we had a nice post on the caucus by our intrepid social media producer, Michael Roston.
Yeah.
And it basically asked the question, can you trust your Twitter followers to tell you who won the debate when you're watching the debate and right after it? And the answer is sort of yes and no. Your Twitter followers will tell you who won the debate, but they'll probably tell you exactly who you also thought won the debate, because most people on social media are following like-minded people. So it doesn't really give you the sort of overall water cooler sentiment. It really gives you a narrower view into people who are like-minded.
I kind of thought, and I think the post sort of goes at the question of thinking about technology as a great democratizer.
Right.
And in this case,
not so much.
Okay.
I mean, it's a great democratizer in the sense that everyone has access to it, and you can sort of tap into people around the world. But really, there are these bubbles there, and you're sort of listening to people who might be more similar to you than you really think.
Okay, can you just take a few seconds and talk about just how we came to this conclusion?
Let's look at the data. Social Flow, which is based in New York, a company that does social media research and analysis, did a visualization showing people who were actively on Twitter saying Biden won or Ryan won in the last debate. Who were the types of people that they were following and being followed by? And what you're seeing here is almost all the people who said that Biden won were following and being followed by people who also said that Biden won, and same true for Ryan. And so again, it shows that sort of there are these communities on Twitter of the hive mind.
Right.
And
but does this suggest that people are not exercising independent judgment?
No, sure. No? I'm sure they are, but they're definitely probably being influenced by people who probably share their worldview anyway.
Okay, that's pretty interesting.
So we did a call out on Twitter.
Okay.
Tell people what we asked was sort of off of this blog post.
So the question was, how do you make up your mind? How do you use Twitter to make up your mind? Television, whomever. And so we're going to read some of the responses. You want to get started?
Sure. I'll start. So there was a woman, Sarah Funes. She had the sort of most pithy response. She said her brain.
Right.
That's how she makes up
I
her
saw quite
mind.
a few who said my gut or things
Right.
like that, or my instincts. Right.
Okay. And then Mike Donahue said, my instincts, just as you just said, although Twitter and follow-up posts will shape the language I use to talk about it. So again, this goes again to people listening carefully to their social media feeds, which may or may not be giving them the most well-rounded view.
Okay.
And then Bernie Michalik said, Twitter, definitely. TV, definitely not.
Interesting. Okay, well, I had John Wisniewski who said, my gut first, then Twitter, and then the NYT editorial in the morning. We like
Thank
that. We have Noticed It, who said, I mostly rely on CNN shows for debate analysis, but then he checks left and right shows as well. And finally, we have Ben, who said, clearly the answer to this question is random people on Twitter and whiskey.
Okay, well, that always helps.
We'll withhold judgment on that one. There was some other guy I noticed at one point who said voodoo, black magic, and the alignment of stars. So I thought that was a creative response.
That almost sounds like maybe the most accurate response of all.
Yeah, really. Okay, really quickly though, I certainly feel like the sense of anticipation is really strong. There have been people around the office today, suggesting that this was such a critical moment for Obama, that the trouble that he, faced after his last debate really put the pressure on a make or break situation for him today. Did you see anything in Twitter or elsewhere that would suggest that people are looking at it that way?
Yeah, I mean, just as I was coming to talk to you, I noticed that the top trending hashtag on Twitter was Obama debate tips, and it was people offering everything from really specific policy-oriented tips for Obama tonight to, things about like what he should be wearing or what he should be eating before the debate or things like that. And I just think that sort of goes to people sort of genuinely worried and thinking that this is a huge, huge moment for Obama. There was not a similar hashtag for Romney.
It's interesting. I saw a bunch of people talking about what he ate tonight. And for those who are wondering, I think it was steak and potatoes.
Steak and potatoes, and Romney had chicken and vegetables.
Okay, we'll see who wins as a result of their meals. Megan, we'll send it right back to you.
Thanks, Jim. We're only a few minutes away from the debate, and White House correspondent Jackie Combs and Romney reporter Michael Barbaro are back with some final thoughts. So guys, obviously they have to respond to the questions that they're given, but what does each candidate want to make sure they bring up tonight? What does Obama want to bring up?
I think this time, unlike the last time, he wants to make sure that he gets in the point about going back to the video in which Mitt Romney told fundraisers that he doesn't have to worry about 47% of the population because they consider themselves victims, dependent on government largesse, and that they're never going to vote for him anyway. I also think he'll want to talk about some of Mitt Romney's contradictions about abortion because he wants to get an appeal out there to women voters.
This is a rare debate where there's a very live story unfolding, and that's the debate over the American consulate in Benghazi, and it's something that Romney's going to bring up. I guarantee it. He's going to talk about Hillary Clinton taking responsibility, and I assume he's going to turn to the president and say, isn't it your turn to take responsibility for the death of an ambassador, for the security lapses?
Mm-hmm. What do we think is going to be the toughest question for each man tonight? What is the thing? Is Obama dreading the disappointed Obama voter that's inevitably going to show up and say, I loved you, I voted for you, I believed in you, why haven't you helped me?
I think you've read my mind. I think that is the question, but it's a one he should actually welcome because there's a lot of people who think like that out there, and he needs to get across to them what he would do and how a second term would be different. And in part, he could turn it around and get again to the 47% video and say, I will continue to work every day of my presidency if you give me another 4 years to help you, and my opponent says it's not his job to do that.
Romney's aides say that they want social issues to come up. They say that he'll be disarming in his approach to such issues. I'm not sure I believe them. I think that potentially the most dangerous question for him is a woman standing up and asking about her reproductive rights, or asking about a gay son who wishes to marry, or daughter who wishes to marry a member of the same sex.
Mm-hmm.
I think those are difficult questions, even if you are empathetic to answer in the negative, which he would do in both those cases.
You guys have both brought up women. women voters? And we've had the sense throughout the last several months of this campaign and at conventions that they're really speaking to women voters,
Right.
that seems to be either the group they're trying to turn out or the sort of persuadable but undecided voter that they're going for. Do you get the sense from both campaigns that there's a specific target on women? I definitely seem to get that sense from the Obama strategy.
Well, they definitely, they have sort of an advantage, or at least are better able to appeal to women who are single, married. Married women are more, leaning towards the Republican,
right.
And so he wants to try to appeal to them. But it's more the single, working mothers and blue-collar women.
And Mitt Romney snuck a line into one of his speeches recently. We all stopped and said, rewind, where he suddenly inserted the single mother in the list of Americans he's most proud of, he thinks are serving something bigger than themselves. Usually it's soldiers, it's,
right.
Your local fireman, the cop,
right.
suddenly single mom. So we know how strategic this is.
And do we feel like that they're speaking to this is a base thing for them, that they're really trying to rev up their people, or that they're trying to reach out to the sort of undecided voters at this point?
Mitt Romney's base is a secure zone, unless he were to suddenly stand up and say he's suddenly for abortion.
Right.
He seems to not have to focus too much of his energies on those folks tonight.
And it's interesting because as he's gained strength in the last 2 weeks, he's taken positions that have confused his position once again on abortion. He's said that government regulation, is an essential thing for the economy.
But the base says we're okay.
And they just want a winner, and so he's fine with that. They're fine with that.
The moderator, Candy Crowley, has begun her introduction, so we're going live to the debate.
2 uncommitted voters from the New York area. Their questions will drive the night. My goal is to give the conversation direction and to ensure questions get answered. The questions are known to me and my team only. Neither the commission nor the candidates have seen them. I hope to get to as many questions as possible, and because I am the optimistic sort, I'm sure the candidates will oblige by keeping their answers concise and on point. Each candidate has as much as 2 minutes to respond to a common question, and there will be a 2-minute follow-up. The audience here in the hall has agreed to be polite and attentive, no cheering or booing or outbursts of any sort. We will set aside that agreement just this once to welcome President Barack Obama and Governor Mitt Romney. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us here tonight. We have a lot of folks who have been waiting all day to talk to you, so I want to get right to it. Governor Romney, as you know, you won the coin toss, so the first question will go to you. And I want to turn to a first-time voter, Jeremy Epstein, who has a question for you.
Mr. President, Governor Romney, as a 20-year-old college student, all I hear from professors, neighbors, and others is that when I graduate, I will have little chance to get employment. What can you say to reassure me, but more importantly, my parents, that I will be able to sufficiently support myself after I graduate?
Thank you, Jeremy. I appreciate your question, and thank you for being here this evening, and to all of those from Nassau County here that have come, thank you for your time. Thank you to Hofstra University and to Candy Crowley for organizing and leading this event. Thank you, Mr. President, also for being part of this debate. Your question is one that's being asked by college kids all over this country. I was in Pennsylvania with someone who just graduated. This was in Philadelphia, and she said, I've got my degree, I can't find a job. I've got 3 part-time jobs. They're just barely enough to pay for my food and pay for an apartment. I can't begin to pay back my student loans. So what we have to do is 2 things. We have to make sure that we make it easier for kids to afford college, and also make sure that when they get out of college, there's a job. When I was governor of Massachusetts, to get a high school degree, you had to pass an exam. If you graduated in the top quarter of your class, we gave you a John and Abigail Adams scholarship, 4 years tuition free to the college of your choice in Massachusetts. It's a public institution. I want to make sure we keep our Pell Grant program growing. We're also going to have our loan program so that people are able to afford school. But the key thing is to make sure you can get a job when you get out of school. And what's happened over the last 4 years has been very, very hard for America's young people. I want you to be able to get a job. I know what it takes to get this economy going. With half of college kids graduating this year without a job, And without a college-level job, that's just unacceptable. And likewise, you've got more and more debt on your back. So more debt and less jobs. I'm going to change that. I know what it takes to create good jobs again. I know what it takes to make sure that you have the kind of opportunity you deserve. And kids across this country are going to recognize we're bringing back an economy. It's not going to be like the last 4 years. The middle class has been crushed over the last 4 years, and jobs have been too scarce. I know what it takes to bring them back, and I'm going to do that and make sure when you graduate. When do you graduate? 2014. When you come out in 2014, I presume I'm going to be president. I'm going to make sure you get a job. Thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, you bet.
Mr. President.
Jeremy, first of all, your future is bright. And the fact that you're making an investment in higher education is critical, not just to you, but to the entire nation. Now, the most important thing we can do is to make sure that we are creating jobs in this country, but not just jobs, good paying jobs, ones that can support a family. And what I want to do is build on the 5 million jobs that we've created over the last 30 months in the private sector alone. And there are a bunch of things that we can do to make sure your future is bright. Number one, I want to build manufacturing jobs in this country again. You know, when Governor Romney said we should let Detroit go bankrupt, I said we're going to bet on American workers and the American auto industry, and it's come surging back. I want to do that in industries, not just in Detroit, but all across the country. And that means we change our tax code, so we're giving incentives to companies that are investing here in the United States and creating jobs here. It also means we're helping them and small businesses to export all around the world in new markets. Number two, we've got to make sure that we have the best education system in the world. And the fact that you're going to college is great, but I want everybody to get a great education. And we've worked hard to make sure that student loans are available for folks like you. But I also want to make sure that community colleges are offering slots for workers to get retrained for the jobs that are out there right now and the jobs of the future. Number three, we've got to control our own energy. You know, not only oil and natural gas, which we've been investing in, but also we've got to make sure we're building the energy sources of the future. Not just thinking about next year, but 10 years from now, 20 years from now. That's why we invest in solar and wind and biofuels, energy efficient cars. We've got to reduce our deficit, but we've got to do it in a balanced way, asking the wealthy to pay a little bit more along with cuts so that we can invest in education like yours. And let's take the money that we've been spending on war over the last decade to rebuild America, roads, bridges, schools. We do those things, not only is your future going to be bright, but America's future is going to be bright as well.
Let me ask you for a more immediate answer, beginning with Mr. Romney. Just quickly, what can you do? We're looking at a situation where 40% of the unemployed have been unemployed for 6 months or more. They don't have the 2 years that Jeremy has. What about those long-term unemployed who need a job right now?
Well, what you're seeing in this country is 23 million people struggling to find a job. And a lot of them, as you say, Candy, have been out of work for a long, long, long time. The president's policies have been exercised over the last 4 years, and they haven't put Americans back to work. We have fewer people working today than we had when the president took office. If the unemployment rate was 7.8% when he took office, it's 7.8% now. But if you calculated that unemployment rate, taking back the people who dropped out of the workforce, it would be 10.7%. We have not made the progress we need to make to put people back to work. That's why I put out a 5-point plan that gets America 12 million new jobs in 4 years and rising take-home pay. It's going to help Jeremy get a job when he comes out of school. It's going to help people across the country that are unemployed right now. And one thing that the president said, which I want to make sure that we understand, he said that I said we should take Detroit bankrupt. And that's right. My plan was to have the company go through bankruptcy like 7-Eleven did and Macy's and Continental Airlines and come out stronger. And I know he keeps saying, you wanted to take Detroit bankrupt. Well, the president took Detroit bankrupt. You took General Motors bankrupt. You took Chrysler bankrupt. So when you say that I wanted to take the auto industry bankrupt, you actually did. And I think it's important to know that that was a process that was necessary to get those companies back on their feet so they could start hiring more people. That was precisely what I recommended and ultimately what happened.
Let me give the president a chance. Go ahead.
Candy, what Governor Romney said just isn't true. He wanted to take them into bankruptcy without providing them any way to stay open. And we would have lost 1 million jobs. And that, don't take my word for it, take the executives at GM and Chrysler, some of whom are Republicans, may even support Governor Romney. But they'll tell you his prescription wasn't going to work. And Governor Romney says he's got a 5-point plan. Governor Romney doesn't have a 5-point plan, he has a 1-point plan. And that plan is to make sure that folks at the top play by a different set of rules. That's been his philosophy in the private sector, that's been his philosophy as governor, that's been his philosophy as a presidential candidate. You can make a lot of money and pay lower tax rates than somebody who makes a lot less. You can ship jobs overseas and get tax breaks for it. You can invest in a company, bankrupt it, lay off the workers, strip away their pensions, and you still make money. That's exactly the philosophy that we've seen in place for the last decade. That's what's been squeezing middle-class families. And we have fought back for 4 years to get out of that mess. The last thing we need to do is to go back to the very same policies that got us there.
Mr. President, the next question is going to be for you here. And Mr. Romney, Governor Romney, there'll be plenty of chances here to go on, but I want to, we have all these folks. I will let you absolutely.
That Detroit answer and the rest of the answer way off the mark.
Okay, you certainly will have lots of time here coming up. Because I want to move you on to something that sort of connected to cars here and go over, and we want to get a question from Philip Turcola.
Your Energy Secretary, Stephen Chu, has now been on record 3 times stating it's not policy of his department to help lower gas prices. Do you agree with Secretary Chu that this is not the job of the Energy Department?
The most important thing we can do is to make sure we control our own energy. So here's what I've done since I've been president. We have increased oil production to the highest levels in 16 years. Natural gas production is the highest it's been in decades. We have seen increases in coal production and coal employment. But what I've also said is we can't just produce traditional sources of energy, we've also got to look to the future. That's why we doubled fuel efficiency standards on cars. That means that in the middle of the next decade, any car you buy, you're going to end up going twice as far on a gallon of gas. That's why we've doubled clean energy production like wind and solar and biofuels. And all these things have contributed to us lowering our oil imports to the lowest levels in 16 years. Now, I want to build on that. And that means, yes, we still continue to open up new areas for drilling. We continue to make it a priority for us to go after natural gas. We've got potentially 600,000 jobs and 100 years worth of energy right beneath our feet with natural gas. And we can do it in an environmentally sound way. But we've also got to continue to figure out how we have efficient energy, because ultimately that's how we're going to reduce demand, and that's what's going to keep gas prices lower. Now, Governor Romney will say he's got an all-of-the-above plan, but basically his plan is to let the oil companies write the energy policies. So he's got the oil and gas part, but he doesn't have the clean energy part. And if we are only thinking about tomorrow or the next day and not thinking about 10 years from now, we're not going to control our own economic future. Because China, Germany, they're making these investments. And I'm not going to cede those jobs of the future to those countries. I expect those new energy sources to be built right here in the United States. That's going to help Jeremy get a job. It's also going to make sure that you're not paying as much for gas.
Governor, on the subject of gas prices.
Well, let's look at the president's policies, all right, as opposed to the rhetoric, because we've had 4 years of policies being played out. And the president's right in terms of the additional oil production, but none of it came on federal land. As a matter of fact, oil production is down 14% this year on federal land, and gas production is down 9%. Why? Because the president cut in half the number of licenses and permits for drilling on federal lands and in federal waters. So where'd the increase come from? Well, a lot of it came from the Bakken Range in North Dakota. What was his participation there? The administration brought a criminal action against the people drilling up there for oil, this massive new resource we have. And what was the cause? 20 or 25 birds were killed, and they brought out a Migratory Bird Act to go after them on a criminal basis. Look, I want to make sure we use our oil, our coal, our gas, our nuclear, our renewables. I believe very much in our renewable capabilities. Ethanol, wind, solar will be an important part of our energy mix. But what we don't need is to have the president keeping us from taking advantage of oil, coal, and gas. This has not been Mr. Oil or Mr. Gas or Mr. Coal. Talk to the people that are working in those industries. I was in coal country. People grab my arms and say, please, save my job. The head of the EPA said, you can't build a coal plant. It's virtually impossible given our regulations. When the president ran for office, he said, if you build a coal plant, you can go ahead, but you'll go bankrupt. That's not the right course for America. Let's take advantage of the energy resources we have, as well as the energy sources for the future. And if we do that, if we do what I'm planning on doing, which is getting us energy independent, for North America energy independence, within 8 years, you're going to see manufacturing jobs come back because our energy is low cost. They're already beginning to come back because of our abundant energy. I'll get America and North America energy independent. I'll do it by more drilling, more permits and licenses. We're going to bring that pipeline in from Canada. How in the world the president said no to that pipeline, I will never know. This is about bringing good jobs back for the middle class of America, and that's what I'm going to do.
Mr. President, let me just see if I can move you to the gist of this question, which is, are we looking at the new normal? I can tell you that tomorrow morning, a lot of people in Hampstead will wake up and fill up, and they will find that the price of gas is over $4 a gallon. Is it within the purview of the government to bring those prices down, or are we looking at the new normal?
Candy, there's no doubt that world demand's gone up, but our production is going up, and we're using oil more efficiently. And very little of what Governor Romney just said is true. We've opened up public lands. We're actually drilling more on public lands than in the previous administration. And the previous president was an oil man. And natural gas isn't just appearing magically. We're encouraging it and working with the industry. And when I hear Governor Romney say he's a big coal guy, and keep in mind, Governor, when you were governor of Massachusetts, you stood in front of a coal plant and pointed at it and said, this plant kills, and took great pride in shutting it down. And now suddenly you're a big champion of coal. So what I've tried to do is be consistent. With respect to something like coal, we made the largest investment in clean coal technology to make sure that even as we're producing more coal, we're producing it cleaner and smarter. Same thing with oil, same thing with natural gas. And the proof is our oil imports are down to the lowest levels in 20 years. Oil production is up, natural gas production is up, and most importantly, we're also starting to build cars that are more efficient. And that's creating jobs. That means those cars can be exported because that's the demand around the world. And it also means that it'll save money in your pocketbook. That's the strategy you need on all of the above strategy, and that's what we're going to do in the next 4 years.
But that's not what you've done in the last 4 years. That's the problem. In the last 4 years, you cut permits and licenses on federal land and federal waters in half.
Not true, Governor Romney.
So how much did you cut them by?
Not true.
By how much did you cut them by then?
Governor, we have actually produced more oil.
No. How much did you cut licenses and permits on federal land and federal waters?
Governor Romney, here's what we did. There were a whole bunch of oil companies.
No, I had a question, and the question was, how much did you cut them by?
You want me to answer
How much did you cut them by?
I'm happy to answer the question.
All right, and it is?
Here's what happened. You had a whole bunch of oil companies who had leases on public lands that they weren't using. So what we said was, you can't just sit on this for 10, 20, 30 years. Decide when you want to drill, when you want to produce, when it's most profitable for you. These are public lands. So if you want to drill on public lands, you use it or you lose it.
Okay, now
and so what we did was take away those leases, and we are now reletting them so that we can actually make a profit.
And production on government lands is down.
No, it isn't.
Production on government land of oil is down 14%. And production on
you're
gas
saying
is down 9%.
It's just not true.
It's absolutely true. Look, there's no question but that the people recognize that we have not produced more oil and gas on federal lands and in federal waters. And coal production is not up. Coal jobs are not up. I was just at a coal facility where some 1,200 people lost their jobs. The right course for America is to have a true all-of-the-above policy. I don't think anyone really believes that you're a person who's going to be pushing for oil and gas and coal. You'll get your chance in a moment. I'm still speaking.
Well,
And the
Governor,
answer is, I don't believe people
if you're
think that's the
asking me a
case,
question,
because
I have an answer.
that wasn't a question.
Okay.
That was
Go
a
ahead.
statement. I don't think the American people believe that. I will fight for oil, coal, and natural gas. And the proof of whether a strategy is working or not is what the price is that you're paying at the pump. If you're paying less than you paid a year or two ago, why, then the strategy is working. But you're paying more. When the president took office, the price of gasoline here in Nassau County was about $1.86 a gallon. Now it's $4 a gallon. Price of electricity is up. If the president's energy policies are working, you're going to see the cost of energy come down. I will fight to create more energy in this country to get America energy secure. And part of that is bringing in a pipeline of oil from Canada, taking advantage of the oil and coal we have here, drilling offshore in Alaska, drilling offshore in Virginia where the people want it. Those things will get us the energy we need.
Mr. President, could you address, because we did finally get to gas prices here, could you address what the governor said, which is if your energy policy was working, the price of gasoline would not be $4 a gallon
Well,
here.
think about what the governor just said. He said, when I took office, the price of gasoline was $1.80, $1.86. Why is that? Because the economy was on the verge of collapse. Because we were about to go through the worst recession since the Great Depression, as a consequence of some of the same policies that Governor Romney is now promoting. So it's conceivable that Governor Romney could bring down gas prices, because with his policies, we might be back in that same mess. What I want to do is to create an economy that is strong and at the same time produce energy. And with respect to this pipeline that Governor Romney keeps on talking about, we've built enough pipeline to wrap around the entire earth once. So I'm all for pipelines, I'm all for oil production. What I'm not for is us ignoring the other half of the equation. So, for example, on wind energy, when Governor Romney says these are imaginary jobs, when you've got thousands of people right now in Iowa, right now in Colorado, who are working, creating wind power with good-paying manufacturing jobs, and the Republican senator in Iowa is all for it, providing tax credits to help this work, and Governor Romney says, I'm opposed. I'd get rid of it. That's not an energy strategy for the future, and we need to win that future. And I intend to win it as President of the United States.
I got to move you along. And the next question is for you.
He actually got the first question, so I get the last question, last answer on that one.
Actually, in the follow-up, it doesn't quite work like that, but I'm going to give you a chance here. I promise you I'm going to. And the next question is for you. So if you want to, continue on, but I don't want to leave all these guys sitting here.
Candy, I don't have a policy of stopping wind jobs in Iowa, and they're not phantom jobs. They're real jobs.
Okay.
I appreciate wind jobs in Iowa and across our country. I appreciate the jobs in coal and oil and gas. I'm going to make sure that taking advantage of our energy resources will bring back manufacturing to America. We're going to get through a very aggressive energy policy, 3.5 million more jobs in this country. It's critical to our future.
Candy, it's
We're going to move you along to
I'm used to being interrupted.
All right, we're going to move you both along to taxes over here, and all these folks that have been waiting. Governor, this question is for you. It comes from Mary Polano, sorry.
Governor Romney, you have stated that if you're elected president, you would plan to reduce the tax rates for all the tax brackets, and that you would work with the Congress to eliminate some deductions in order to make up for the loss in revenue. Concerning these various deductions, the mortgage deduction, the charitable deductions, the child tax credit, and also the, what's that other credit?
You're doing great.
Oh, I remember. The education credits, which are important to me because I have children in college. What would be your position on those things, which are important to the middle class?
Thank you very much. And let me tell you, you're absolutely right about part of that, which is I want to bring the rates down. I want to simplify the tax code, and I want to get middle-income taxpayers to have lower taxes. And the reason I want middle-income taxpayers to have lower taxes is because middle-income taxpayers have been buried over the past 4 years. You've seen, as middle-income people in this country, incomes go down $4,300 a family, even as gasoline prices have gone up $2,000. Health insurance premiums up $2,500. Food prices up. Utility prices up. The middle income families in America have been crushed over the last 4 years. So I want to get some relief to middle income families. That's part one. Now, how about deductions? Because I'm going to bring rates down across the board for everybody, but I'm going to limit deductions and exemptions and credits, particularly for people at the high end, because I am not going to have people at the high end pay less than they're paying now. The top 5% of taxpayers will continue to pay 60% of the income tax the nation collects. So that'll stay the same. Middle income people are going to get a tax break. And so in terms of bringing down deductions, one way of doing that would be to say everybody gets, I'll pick a number, $25,000 of deductions and credits. And you can decide which ones to use. Your home mortgage interest deduction, charity, child tax credit, and so forth. You can use those as part of filling that bucket, if you will, of deductions. But your rate comes down, and the burden also comes down on you for one more reason, and that is every middle-income taxpayer no longer will pay any tax on interest, dividends, or capital gains. No tax on your savings. That makes life a lot easier. If you're getting interest from a bank, if you're getting a statement from a mutual fund, or any other kind of investments you have, you don't have to worry about filing taxes on that, because there'll be no taxes for anybody making $200,000 a year and less on your interest, dividends, and capital gains. Why am I lowering taxes on the middle class? Because under the last 4 years, they've been buried. And I want to help people in the middle class. And I will not, under any circumstances, reduce the share that's being paid by the highest income taxpayers. And I will not, under any circumstances, increase taxes on the middle class. The president's spending, the president's borrowing, will cause this nation to have to raise taxes on the American people, not just at the high end. A recent study has shown the people in the middle class will see $4,000 a year higher taxes as a result of the spending and borrowing of this administration. I will not let that happen. I'll get us on track to a balanced budget, and I'm going to reduce the tax burden on middle-income families. And what's that going to do? It's going to help those families, and it's going to create incentives to start growing jobs again in this country.
Thanks, Governor.
Thank you.
My philosophy on taxes has been simple, and that is I want to give middle-class families and folks who are striving to get in the middle class some relief, because they have been hit hard over the last decade, over the last 15, over the last 20 years. So 4 years ago, I stood on a stage just like this one. Actually, it was at a town hall, and I said I would cut taxes for middle-class families, and that's what I've done, by $3,600. I said I would cut taxes for small businesses, who are the drivers and engines of growth, and we've cut them 18 times. And I want to continue those tax cuts for middle-class families and for small businesses. But what I've also said is, if we're serious about reducing the deficit, if this is genuinely a moral obligation to the next generation, then in addition to some tough spending cuts, we've also got to make sure that the wealthy do a little bit more. So what I've said is, your first $250,000 worth of income, no change. And that means 98% of American families, 97% of small businesses, they will not see a tax increase. I'm ready to sign that bill right now. The only reason it's not happening is because Governor Romney's allies in Congress have held the 98% hostage because they want tax breaks for the top 2%. But what I've also said is, for above $250,000, we can go back to the tax rates we had when Bill Clinton was president. We created 23 million new jobs. That's part of what took us from deficits to surplus. It will be good for our economy, and it will be good for job creation. Now, Governor Romney has a different philosophy. He was on 60 Minutes just 2 weeks ago, and he was asked, is it fair for somebody like you making $20 million a year to pay a lower tax rate than a nurse or a bus driver, somebody making $50,000 a year? And he said, yes, I think that's fair. Not only that, he said, I think that's what grows the economy. Well, I fundamentally disagree with that. I think what grows the economy is when you get that tax credit that we put in place for your kids going to college. I think that grows the economy. I think what grows the economy is when we make sure small businesses are getting a tax credit for hiring veterans who fought for our country. That grows our economy. So we just have a different theory. And when Governor Romney stands here after a year of campaigning, when during a Republican primary he stood on stage and said, I'm going to give tax cuts. He didn't say tax rate cuts. He said tax cuts to everybody, including the top 1%. You should believe him, because that's been his history. And that's exactly the kind of top-down economics that is not going to work if we want a strong middle class and an economy that's thriving for everybody.
Governor Romney, I'm sure you've got a reply there.
You're absolutely right. You heard what I said about my tax plan. The top 5% will continue to pay 60% as they do today. I'm not looking to cut taxes for wealthy people. I am looking to cut taxes for middle-income people. And why do I want to bring rates down and at the same time lower exemptions and deductions, particularly for people at the high end? Because if you bring rates down, it makes it easier for small business to keep more of their capital and hire people. And for me, this is about jobs. I want to get America's economy going again. 54% of America's workers work in businesses that are taxed as individuals. So when you bring those rates down, those small businesses are able to keep more money and hire more people. For me, I look at what's happened in the last 4 years and say, this has been a disappointment. We can do better than this. We don't have to settle for how many months? 43 months with unemployment above 8%. 23 million Americans struggling to find a good job right now. There are 3.5 million more women living in poverty today than when the president took office. We don't have to live like this. We can get this economy going again. My 5-point plan does it. Energy independence for North America in 5 years, opening up more trade, particularly in Latin America, cracking down on China when they cheat, getting us to a balanced budget, fixing our training programs for our workers, and finally, championing small business. I want to help small businesses grow and thrive. I know how to make that happen. I spent my life in the private sector. I know why jobs come and why they go. And they're going now because of the policies of this administration.
Governor, let me ask the president something about what you just said. The governor says that he is not going to allow the top 5%, I believe is what he said, to have a tax cut, that it will all even out, that what he wants to do is give that tax cut to the middle class. Settled?
No, it's not settled. Look, the cost of lowering rates for everybody across the board, 20%, along with what he also wants to do in terms of eliminating the estate tax, along what he wants to do in terms of corporate changes in the tax code, it costs about $5 trillion. Governor Romney then also wants to spend $2 trillion on additional military programs, even though the military is not asking for them. That's $7 trillion. He also wants to continue the Bush tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans. That's another $1 trillion. That's $8 trillion. Now, what he says is he's going to make sure that this doesn't add to the deficit, and he's going to cut middle-class taxes. But when he's asked, how are you going to do it, which deductions, which loopholes are you going to close, he can't tell you. The fact that he only has to pay 14% on his taxes when a lot of you are paying much higher, you know, he's already taken that off the board. Capital gains are going to continue to be at a low rate, so we're not going to get money that way. We haven't heard from the governor any specifics beyond Big Bird and eliminating funding for Planned Parenthood in terms of how he pays for that. Now, Governor Romney was a very successful investor. If somebody came to you, Governor, with a plan that said, here, I want to spend $7 or $8 trillion, and we're going to pay for it, but we can't tell you until maybe after the election how we're going to do it, you wouldn't have taken such a sketchy deal. And neither should you, the American people, because the math doesn't add up. And what's at stake here is one of two things. Either, Candy, this blows up the deficit, because keep in mind, this is just to pay for the additional spending that he's talking about. $7-8 trillion, that's before we even get to the deficit we already have. Or alternatively, it's got to be paid for not only by closing deductions for wealthy individuals, that'll pay for about 4% reduction in tax rates. You're going to be paying for it. You'll lose some deductions. And you can't buy this sales pitch Nobody who's looked at it that's serious actually believes it adds up.
Mr. President, let me get the governor in on this. And Governor, let's, before we get into a vast array of who says what study says what, if it shouldn't add up, if somehow when you get in there isn't enough tax revenue coming in, if somehow the numbers don't add up, would you be willing to look again at a 20%?
Well, of course they add up. I was someone who ran businesses for 25 years and balanced the budget. I ran the Olympics and balanced the budget. I ran the state of Massachusetts as a governor, to the extent any governor does, and balanced the budget all 4 years. When we're talking about math that doesn't add up, how about $4 trillion of deficits over the last 4 years? $5 trillion. That's math that doesn't add up. We have a president talking about someone's plan in a way that's completely foreign to what my real plan is. And then we have his own record, which is we have 4 consecutive years where he said when he was running for office he would cut the deficit in half. Instead, he's doubled it. We've gone from $10 trillion of national debt to $16 trillion of national debt. If the president were reelected, we go to almost $20 trillion of national debt. This puts us on a road to Greece. I know what it takes to balance budgets. I've done it my entire life. So, for instance, when he says, yours is a $5 trillion cut, well, no, it's not, because I'm offsetting some of the reductions, withholding down some of the deductions. And
Governor, I need to have you both hang up. I understand the stakes here. I understand both of you, but I will get run out of town if I don't allow
to you, Mr. President. I just described to you precisely how I do it, with a single number that people can put, and they can put their deductions and credits into that bucket.
Mr. President, we're keeping track, I promise you. And Mr. President, the next question is for you, so stay standing. And it's Catherine Fenton who has a question for you.
In what new ways do you intend to rectify the inequalities in the workplace, specifically regarding females making only 72% of what their male counterparts earn?
Well, Catherine, this is a great question. And, you know, I was raised by a single mom who had to put herself through school while looking after 2 kids. And she worked hard every day and made a lot of sacrifices to make sure we got everything we needed. My grandmother, she started off as a secretary in a bank. She never got college education, even though she was smart as a whip. And she worked her way up to become a vice president of a local bank, but she hit the glass ceiling. She trained people who would end up becoming her bosses during the course of her career. She didn't complain. That's not what you did in that generation. And this is one of the reasons why the first bill I signed was something called the Lilly Ledbetter bill. And this is named after this amazing woman who had been doing the same job as a man for years, found out that she was getting paid less, and the Supreme Court said that she couldn't bring suit because she should have found out about it earlier. She had no way of finding out about it. So we fixed that. And that's an example of the kind of advocacy that we need, because women are increasingly the breadwinners in the family. This is not just a women's issue. This is a family issue. There's a middle-class issue. And that's why we've got to fight for it. It also means that we've got to make sure that young people like yourself are able to afford a college education. Earlier, Governor Romney talked about he wants to make Pell Grants and other education accessible for young people. Well, the truth of the matter is that that's exactly what we've done. We've expanded Pell Grants for millions of people, including millions of young women all across the country. We did it by taking $60 billion that was going to banks and lenders as middlemen for the student loan program, and we said, let's just cut out the middleman. Let's give the money directly to students. And as a consequence, we've seen millions of young people be able to afford college, and that's going to make sure that young women are going to be able to compete in that marketplace. But we've got to enforce the laws, which is what we are doing, and we've also got to make sure that in every walk of life, we do not tolerate discrimination. That's been one of the hallmarks of my administration. I'm going to continue to push on this issue for the next 4 years.
Governor Romney, pay equity for women.
Thank you, and important topic, and one which I learned a great deal about, particularly as I was serving as governor of my state, because I had the chance to pull together a cabinet, and all the applicants seemed to be men. And I went to my staff and I said, how come all the people for these jobs are all men? They said, well, these are the people that have the qualifications. And I said, well, gosh, can't we find some women that are also qualified? And so we took a concerted effort to go out and find women who had backgrounds that could be qualified to become members of our cabinet. I went to a number of women's groups and said, can you help us find folks? And they brought us whole binders full of women. I was proud of the fact that after I staffed my cabinet and my senior staff, that the University of New York in Albany did a survey of all 50 states and concluded that mine had more women in senior leadership positions than any other state in America. Now, one of the reasons I was able to get so many good women to be part of that team was because of our recruiting effort, but number two, because I recognize that if you're going to have women in the workforce, that sometimes they need to be more flexible. My chief of staff, for instance, had 2 kids that were still in school. She said, I can't be here until 7 or 8 o'clock at night. I need to be able to get home at 5 o'clock so I can be there for making dinner for my kids and being with them when they get home from school. So he said, fine, let's have a flexible schedule so you can have hours that work for you. We're going to have employers in the new economy, in the economy I'm going to bring to play, that are going to be so anxious to get good workers, they're going to be anxious to hire women. In the last 4 years, women have lost 580,000 jobs. That's the net of what's happened in the last 4 years. We're still down 580,000 jobs. I mentioned 3.5 million women more now in poverty than 4 years ago. What we can do to help young women and women of all ages is to have a strong economy, so strong that employers are looking to find good employees and bringing them into their workforce and adapting to a flexible work schedule that gives women the opportunities that they would otherwise not be able to afford. This is what I've done. It's what I look forward to doing, and I know what it takes to make an economy work. And I know what a working economy looks like. And an economy with 7.8% unemployment is not a real strong economy. An economy that has 23 million people looking for work is not a strong economy. An economy with 50% of kids graduating from college that can't find a job or a college-level job, that's not what we have to have. I'm going to help women in America get good work by getting a stronger economy and by supporting women in the workforce.
Mr. President, why don't you get in on this quickly, please?
Catherine, I just want to point out that when Governor Romney's campaign was asked about the Lilly Ledbetter bill, whether he supported it, he said, I'll get back to you. And that's not the kind of advocacy that women need in any economy. Now, there's some other issues that have a bearing on how women succeed in the workplace. For example, their health care. Now, a major difference in this campaign is that Governor Romney feels comfortable having politicians in Washington decide the health care choices that women are making. I think that's a mistake. In my health care bill, I said insurance companies need to provide contraceptive coverage to everybody who's insured, because this is not just a health issue, it's an economic issue for women. It makes a difference. This is money out of that family's pocket. Governor Romney not only opposed it, he suggested that, in fact, employers should be able to make the decision as to whether or not a woman gets contraception through her insurance coverage. That's not the kind of advocacy that women need. When Governor Romney says that we should eliminate funding for Planned Parenthood, there are millions of women all across the country who rely on Planned Parenthood for not just contraceptive care, they rely on it for mammograms, for cervical cancer screenings. That's a pocketbook issue for women and families all across the country. And it makes a difference in terms of how well and effectively women are able to work. When we talk about child care and the credits that we're providing, that makes a difference in terms of whether they can go out there and earn a living for their family. These are not just women's issues. These are family issues. These are economic issues. And one of the things that makes us grow as an economy is when everybody participates and women are getting the same fair deal as men are. And I've got 2 daughters, and I want to make sure that they have the same opportunities that anybody's sons have. And that's part of what I'm fighting for as President of the United States.
I want to move us along here to Susan Katz, who has a question, and Governor, it's for you.
Governor Romney, I am an undecided voter because I'm disappointed with the lack of progress I've seen in the last 4 years. However, I do attribute much of America's economic and international problems to the failings and missteps of the Bush administration. Since both you and President Bush are Republicans, I fear a return to the policies of those years should you win this election. What is the biggest difference between you and George W. Bush, and how do you differentiate yourself from George W. Bush?
Great. Thank you, and I appreciate that question. I just want to make sure that I think I was supposed to get that last answer, but I want to point out that I don't believe.
I don't think so, Candy.
I don't believe.
I want to make sure our timekeepers are working
Okay.
here.
The
timekeepers are all working, and
All
let me
right.
tell you that the last part, for the two of you to talk to one another, and it isn't quite as ordered as you think. But go ahead and use this 2 minutes any way you'd like to. The question is on the floor.
I just note that I don't believe that bureaucrats in Washington should tell someone whether they can use contraceptives or not. And I don't believe employers should tell someone whether they could have contraceptive care or not. Every woman in America should have access to contraceptives. And the president's statement of my policy is completely and totally wrong.
Governor,
Let me
that's
come
not
back and answer your question. President Bush and I are different people, and these are different times. And that's why my 5-point plan is so different than what he would have done. I mean, for instance, we can now, by virtue of new technology, actually get all the energy we need in North America without having to go to the Arabs or the Venezuelans or anyone else. That wasn't true in his time. That's why my policy starts with a very robust policy to get all that energy in North America and become energy secure. Number two, trade. I'll crack down on China. President Bush didn't. I'm also going to dramatically expand trade in Latin America. It's been growing about 12% per year over a long period of time. I want to add more free trade agreements so we have more trade. Number three, I'm going to get us to a balanced budget. President Bush didn't. President Obama was right. He said that was outrageous to have deficits as high as $500 billion under the Bush years. He was right. But then he put in place deficits twice that size for every one of his 4 years. And his forecast for the next 4 years is more deficits, almost that large. So that's the next area I'm different than President Bush. And then let's take the last one, championing small business. Our party has been focused on big business too long. I came through small business. I understand how hard it is to start a small business. That's why everything I'll do is designed to help small businesses grow and add jobs. I want to keep their taxes down on small business. I want regulators to see their job as encouraging small enterprise, not crushing it. And the thing I find most troubling about Obamacare, well, it's a long list, but one of the things I find most troubling is that when you go out and talk to small businesses and ask them what they think about it, they tell you it keeps them from hiring more people. My priority is jobs. I know how to make that happen. And President Bush had a very different path for a very different time. My path is designed in getting small businesses to grow and hire people.
Thanks, Governor. Mr. President.
Well, first of all, I think it's important to tell you that we did come in during some tough times. We were losing 800,000 jobs a month when I started. But we have been digging our way out of policies that were misplaced and focused on the top doing very well and middle-class folks not doing well. Now, we've seen 31 consecutive months of job growth, 5.2 million new jobs created. And the plans that I talked about will create even more. But when Governor Romney says that he has a very different economic plan, the centerpiece of his economic plan are tax cuts. That's what took us from surplus to deficit. When he talks about getting tough on China, keep in mind that Governor Romney invested in companies that were pioneers of outsourcing to China and is currently investing in countries, in companies that are building surveillance equipment for China to spy on its own folks. Governor, you're the last person who's going to get tough on China. And what we've done when it comes to trade is not only sign 3 trade deals to open up new markets, but we've also set up a task force for trade that goes after anybody who is taking advantage of American workers or businesses and not creating a level playing field. We've brought twice as many cases against unfair trade practices than the previous administration, and we've won every single one that's been decided. When I said that we had to make sure that China was not flooding our domestic market with cheap tires, Governor Romney said I was being protectionist, that it wouldn't be helpful to American workers. Well, in fact, we saved 1,000 jobs. And that's the kind of tough trade actions that are required. But the last point I want to make is this. There are some things where Governor Romney is different from George Bush. George Bush didn't propose turning Medicare into a voucher. George Bush embraced comprehensive immigration reform. He didn't call for self-deportation. George Bush never suggested that we eliminate funding for Planned Parenthood. So there are differences between Governor Romney and George Bush, but they're not on economic policy. In some ways, he's gone to a more extreme place of our economy forward.
I want to move you both along to the next question because it's in the same wheelhouse, so you will be able to respond. But the president does get this question. I want to call on Michael Jones.
Mr. President, I voted for you in 2008. What have you done or accomplished to earn my vote in 2012? I'm not that optimistic as I was in 2012. Most things I need for everyday living are very expensive.
Well, we've gone through a tough 4 years. There's no doubt about it. But 4 years ago, I told the American people, and I told you, I would cut taxes for middle-class families. And I did. I told you I'd cut taxes for small businesses, and I have. I said that I'd end the war in Iraq, and I did. I said we'd refocus attention on those who actually attacked us on 9/11. And we have gone after al-Qaeda's leadership like never before, and Osama bin Laden is dead. I said that we would put in place health care reform to make sure that insurance companies can't jerk you around, and if you don't have health insurance, that you'd have a chance to get affordable insurance. And I have. I committed that I would rein in the excesses of Wall Street, and we passed the toughest Wall Street reforms since the 1930s. We've created 5 million jobs, gone from 800,000 jobs a month being lost, and we are making progress. We saved an auto industry that was on the brink of collapse. Now, does that mean you're not struggling? Absolutely not. A lot of us are. And that's why the plan that I put forward for manufacturing and education and reducing our deficit in a sensible way, using the savings from ending wars to rebuild America and putting people back to work, making sure that we are controlling our own energy, but not just the energy of today, but also the energy of the future. All those things will make a difference. So the point is, the commitments I've made, I've kept. And those that I haven't been able to keep, it's not for lack of trying, and we're going to get it done in a second term. But you should pay attention to this campaign because Governor Romney has made some commitments as well. And I suspect he'll keep those too. When members of the Republican Congress say we're going to sign a no-tax pledge so that we don't ask a dime from millionaires and billionaires to reduce our deficit so we can still invest in education and helping kids go to college, he said, me too. When they said, we're going to cut Planned Parenthood funding, he said, me too. When he said, we're going to repeal Obamacare, first thing I'm going to do, despite the fact that it's the same health care plan that he passed in Massachusetts and is working well, he said, me too. That is not the kind of leadership that you need, but you should expect that those are promises he's going to keep.
Mr.
And
President,
the choice in this election is going to be whose promises are going to be more likely to help you in your life, make sure your kids can go to college, make sure that you are getting a good paying job, making sure that Medicare and Social Security will be there for you.
Thank you. Governor.
I think you know better. I think you know that these last 4 years haven't been so good as the president just described, and that you don't feel like you're confident that the next 4 years are going to be much better either. I can tell you that if you were to elect President Obama, you know what you're going to get. You're going to get a repeat of the last 4 years. We just can't afford 4 more years like the last 4 years. He said that by now we'd have unemployment at 5.4%. The difference between where it is and 5.4% is 9 million Americans without work. I wasn't the one that said 5.4%. This was the president's plan. Didn't get there. He said he would have by now put forward a plan to reform Medicare and Social Security because he pointed out they're on the road to bankruptcy. He would reform them. He'd get that done. He hasn't even made a proposal on either one. He said in his first year he'd put out an immigration plan that would deal with our immigration challenges. Didn't even file it. This is a president who has not been able to do what he said he'd do. He said that he'd cut in half the deficit. He hasn't done that either. In fact, he doubled it. He said that by now middle-income families would have a reduction in their health insurance premiums by $2,500 a year. It's gone up by $2,500 a year. And if Obamacare is passed or implemented, it's already been passed, if it's implemented fully, it'll be another $2,500 on top. The middle class is getting crushed under the policies of a president who has not understood what it takes to get the economy working again. He keeps saying, look, I've created 5 million jobs. That's after losing 5 million jobs. The entire record is such that the unemployment has not been reduced in this country. The unemployment, the number of people who are still looking for work, is still 23 million Americans. There are more people in poverty, 1 out of 6 people in poverty. How about food stamps? When he took office, 32 million people were on food stamps. Today, 47 million people are on food stamps. How about the growth of the economy? It's growing more slowly this year than last year, and more slowly last year than the year before. The president wants to do well, I understand, but the policies he's put in place, from Obamacare to Dodd-Frank, to his tax policies, to his regulatory policies, these policies combined have not led this economy take off and grow like it could have. You might say, well, you got an example of when it worked better? Yeah. In the Reagan recession, where unemployment hit 10.8%, between that period, the end of that recession, and equivalent period of time to today, Ronald Reagan's recovery created twice as many jobs as this president's recovery. 5 million jobs doesn't even keep up with our population growth. And the only reason the unemployment rate seems a little lower today is because of all the people that have dropped out of the workforce. The president has tried, but his policies haven't worked. He's great as a speaker and describing his plans and his vision. That's wonderful, except we have a record to look at. And that record shows he just hasn't been able to cut the deficit, to put in place reforms for Medicare and Social Security, to preserve them, to get us the rising incomes we need. Median incomes down $4,300 a family, and 23 million Americans out of work. That's what this election is about. It's about who can get the middle class in this country a bright and prosperous future and assure our kids the kind of hope and optimism they deserve.
Governor, I want to move you along. Don't go away, and we'll have plenty of time to respond. We are quite aware of the clock for both of you, but I want to bring in a different subject here. Mr. President, I'll be right back with you. Lorraine Osorio has a question for you about a topic we have not heard. Yes, this is for Governor Romney, and we'll be right with you, Mr. President. Thanks.
Is it Lorena?
Lorraine.
Lorraine?
Yeah, Lorraine. Yes.
Lorraine.
How you doing?
Good, thanks.
President. Romney, what do you plan on doing with immigrants without their green card that are currently living here as productive members of society?
Thank you. Lorraine, did I get that right? Good. Thank you for your question. And let me step back and tell you what I'd like to do with our immigration policy broadly and include an answer to your question. First of all, this is a nation of immigrants. We welcome people coming to this country as immigrants. My dad was born in Mexico of American parents. Ann's dad was born in Wales and is a first-generation American. We welcome legal immigrants into this country. I want our legal system to work better. I want it to be streamlined. I want it to be clearer. I don't think you shouldn't have to hire a lawyer to figure out how to get into this country legally. I also think that we should give visas to people, green cards rather, to people who graduate with skills that we need. People around the world with accredited degrees in science and math get a green card stapled to their diploma. Come to the US of A. We should make sure that our legal system works. Number two, we're going to have to stop illegal immigration. There are 4 million people who are waiting in line to get here legally. those who've come here illegally take their place. So I will not grant amnesty to those who've come here illegally. What I will do is I'll put in place an employment verification system and make sure that employers that hire people who have come here illegally are sanctioned for doing so. I won't put in place magnets for people coming here illegally. So, for instance, I would not give driver's licenses to those that have come here illegally, as the president would. The kids of those that came here illegally, those kids, I think, should have a pathway to become a permanent resident of the United States. And military service, for instance, is one way they would have that kind of pathway to become a permanent resident. Now, when the president ran for office, he said that he'd put in place in his first year a piece of legislation. He'd file a bill in his first year that would reform our immigration system, protect legal immigration, stop illegal immigration. He didn't do it. He had a Democrat House and Democrat Senate, supermajority in both houses. Why did he fail to even promote legislation that would have provided an answer for those that want to come here legally and for those that are here illegally today? That's a question I think the president will have a chance to answer right now.
Good. I look forward to it. Was Lorraine, we are a nation of immigrants. I mean, we're just a few miles away from Ellis Island. We all understand what this country has become because talent from all around the world wants to come here. People who are willing to take risks. People who want to build on their dreams and make sure their kids have even bigger dreams than they have. But we're also a nation of laws. So what I've said is we need to fix a broken immigration system, and I've done everything that I can on my own and sought cooperation from Congress to make sure that we fix this system. First thing we did was to streamline the legal immigration system, to reduce the backlog, make it easier, simpler, and cheaper for people who are waiting in line, obeying the law to make sure that they can come here and contribute to our country. And that's good for our economic growth. They'll start new businesses. They'll make things happen that create jobs here in the United States. Number two, we do have to deal with our border. So we put more Border Patrol on than any time in history, and the flow of undocumented workers across the border is actually lower than it's been in 40 years. What I've also said is, if we're going to go after folks who are here illegally, we should do it smartly and go after folks who are criminals, gangbangers, people who are hurting the community, not after students, not after folks who are here just because they're trying to figure out how to feed their families. And that's what we've done. And what I've also said is, for young people who come here, brought here oftentimes by their parents, have gone to school here, pledged allegiance to the flag, think of this as their country, understand themselves as Americans in every way except having papers, then we should make sure that we give them a pathway to citizenship. And that's what I've done administratively. Now, Governor Romney just said that he wants to help those young people too, but during the Republican primary, he said, I will veto the DREAM Act that would allow these young people to have access. His main strategy during the Republican primary was to say, we're going to encourage self-deportation, making life so miserable on folks that they'll leave. He called the Arizona law a model for the nation. Part of the Arizona law said that law enforcement officers could stop folks because they suspected maybe they looked like they might be undocumented workers and check their papers. And you know what? If my daughter or yours looks to somebody like they're not a citizen, I don't want to empower somebody like that. So we can fix this system in a comprehensive way. And when Governor Romney says the challenge is, well, Obama didn't try, that's not true. I sat down with Democrats and Republicans at the beginning of my term, and I said, let's fix this system, including senators previously who had supported it on the Republican side. But it's very hard for Republicans in Congress to support comprehensive immigration reform if their standard bearer has said that this is not something I'm interested in supporting.
Let me get the governor in here, Mr. President. Let's speak to, if you could, Governor, the idea of self-deportation.
Let me go back and speak to the points that the president made, and let's get them correct. I did not say that the Arizona law was a model for the nation in that aspect. I said that the E-Verify portion of the Arizona law, which is the portion of the law which says that employers could be able to determine whether someone is here illegally or not illegally, that was a model for the nation. That's number one. Number two, I asked the president a question I think Hispanics and immigrants all over the nation have asked. He was asked this on Univision the other day. Why, when you said you'd file legislation in your first year, didn't you do it? And he didn't answer. He doesn't answer that question. He said the standard bearer wasn't for it. I'm glad you thought I was a standard bearer 4 years ago, but I wasn't. 4 years ago, you said in your first year you would file legislation. In his first year, I was licking my wounds from having been beaten by John McCain. All right, I was not the standard bearer. My view is that this president should have honored his promise to do as he said. Now, let me mention one other thing, and that is self-deportation says let people make their own choice. What I was saying is we're not going to round up 12 million people, undocumented, illegals, and take them out of the nation. Instead, let people make their own choice. And if they find that they can't get the benefits here that they want, and they can't find the job they want, then they'll make a decision to go a place where they have better opportunities. But I'm not in favor of rounding up people and taking them out of this country. I am in favor, as the president has said, and I agree with him, which is that if people have committed crimes, we've got to get them out of this country. Let me mention something else the president said. It was a moment ago, and I didn't get a chance to, when he was describing Chinese investments and so forth.
Candy, hold on a second.
Mr. President, I'm still speaking.
I'm sorry.
Mr. President, why don't you let me finish? I'm going to continue. I'm going to continue.
Governor Romney, if you can make it short. See all these people? They've been waiting for you. Could you
Just
make
going to
it
make
short?
a point. Any investments I have over the last 8 years have been managed by a blind trust. And I understand they do include investments outside the United States, including in Chinese companies. Mr. President, have you looked at your pension? Have you looked at your pension?
I've got to say.
Mr. President, have you looked at your pension?
You know, I don't look at my pension. It's not as big as yours, so it doesn't take as long.
Let me give you some advice.
I don't check it that often.
Let me give you some advice. Look at your pension. You also have investments in Chinese companies. Yeah. You also have investments outside the United States. Yeah. You also have investments through a Cayman's trust.
We're sort of way off topic
so Mr.
here,
President,
Governor Romney.
We're a little off topic.
Completely off the immigration.
I thought we were talking about immigration.
And
I came back to what you spoke about before.
I want to make sure
if I could have you sit down, Governor Romney, thank you.
I do want to make sure that we just understand something. Governor Romney says he wasn't referring to Arizona as a model for the nation. His top advisor on immigration is the guy who designed the Arizona law, the entirety of it, not E-Verify, the whole thing. That's his policy, and it's a bad policy, and it won't help us grow. Look, when we think about immigration, we have to understand there are folks all around the world who still see America as the land of promise. And they provide us energy, and they provide us innovation, and they start companies like Intel and Google, and we want to encourage that. Now, we've got to make sure that we do it in a smart way, in a comprehensive way, and we make the legal system better. But when we make this into a divisive political issue, and when we don't have bipartisan support, I can deliver, Governor, a whole bunch of Democrats to get comprehensive immigration reform done, and
I'll get it done. First year.
We have not seen
Mr. President, let me move you on
serious
here,
about
please.
this issue at all.
Mr.
And
President,
it's time for them to get serious on it. This
don't
used to
go
be a
away,
bipartisan
though.
issue.
Right. Don't go away because
I'm here.
I want you to talk to Carrie Lotka, who wants to switch a topic for us.
Okay. Hi, Karen.
Good evening, Mr. President.
I'm sorry, what's your name?
It's Carrie Latka.
Great to see you.
This question actually comes from a brain trust of my friends at Global Telecom Supply in Mineola yesterday. We were sitting around talking about Libya, and we were reading and became aware of reports that the State Department refused extra security for our embassy in Benghazi, Libya, prior to the attacks that killed 4 Americans. Who was it that denied enhanced security, and why?
Well, let me first of all talk about our diplomats, because they serve all around the world and do an incredible job in a very dangerous situation. And these aren't just representatives of the United States, they're my representatives. I send them there, oftentimes into harm's way. I know these folks, and I know their families. So nobody's more concerned about their safety and security than I am. So as soon as we found out that the Benghazi consulate was being overrun. I was on the phone with my national security team, and I gave them 3 instructions. Number 1, beef up our security and procedures, not just in Libya, but in every embassy and consulate in the region. Number 2, investigate exactly what happened, regardless of where the facts lead us, to make sure that folks are held accountable and it doesn't happen again. And number 3, we are going to find out who did this and we're going to hunt them down. Because one of the things that I've said throughout my presidency is when folks mess with Americans, we go after them. Now, Governor Romney had a very different response. While we were still dealing with our diplomats being threatened, Governor Romney put out a press release trying to make political points. And that's not how a commander-in-chief operates. You don't turn national security into a political issue. Certainly not right when it's happening. And not everybody agrees with some of the decisions I've made. But when it comes to our national security, I mean what I say. I said I'd end the war in Libya, in Iraq, and I did. I said that we'd go after al-Qaeda and bin Laden. We have. I said we'd transition out of Afghanistan and start making sure that Afghans are responsible for their own security. That's what I'm doing. And when it comes to this issue, when I say that we are going to find out exactly what happened, everybody will be held accountable, and I am ultimately responsible for what's taking place there, because these are my folks, and I'm the one who has to greet those coffins when they come home. You know that I mean what I say.
Mr. President, I've got to move us along. Governor?
Thank you, Carrie, for your question. It's an important one. And I think the President just said correctly that the buck does stop at his desk, and he takes responsibility for that, for the failure in providing those security resources, and those terrible things may well happen from time to time. I feel very deeply sympathetic for the families of those who lost loved ones. And today there's a memorial service for one of those that was lost in this tragedy. We think of their families and care for them deeply. There were other issues associated with this tragedy. There were many days that passed before we knew whether this was a spontaneous demonstration or actually whether it was a terrorist attack. And there was no demonstration involved. It was a terrorist attack. And it took a long time for that to be told to the American people. Whether there was some misleading or instead whether we just didn't know what happened, I think you have to ask yourself, why didn't we know 5 days later when the ambassador to the United Nations went on TV to say that this was a demonstration? How could we have not known? But I find more troubling than this, that on the day following the assassination of a United States ambassador, the first time that's happened since 1979, when we have 4 Americans killed there, when apparently we didn't know what happened, that the President, the day after that happened, flies to Las Vegas for a political fundraiser, then the next day to Colorado for another event, another political event. I think these actions taken by a president and a leader have symbolic significance, and perhaps even material significance, in that you'd hope that during that time we could call in the people who were actually eyewitnesses. We've read their accounts now about what happened. It was very clear this was not a demonstration. This was an attack by terrorists. And this calls into question the president's whole policy in the Middle East. Look what's happening in Syria, in Egypt, now in Libya. Consider the distance between ourselves and Israel. The president said that he was going to put daylight between us and Israel. We have Iran 4 years closer to a nuclear bomb. Syria is not just the tragedy of 30,000 civilians being killed by a military, but also a strategically significant player for America. The president's policies throughout the Middle East began with an apology tour and pursue a strategy of leading from behind. And this strategy is unraveling before our very eyes.
Because we're closing in, I want to still get a lot of people in. I want to ask you something, Mr. President, and then have the governor just quickly. Your Secretary of State, as I'm sure you know, has said that she takes full responsibility for the attack on the diplomatic mission in Benghazi. Does the buck stop with your Secretary of State as far as what went on here?
No. Secretary Clinton has done an extraordinary job, but she works for me. I'm the president, and I'm always responsible. And that's why nobody's more interested in finding out exactly what happened than I did. The day after the attack, Governor, I stood in the Rose Garden and I told the American people and the world that we were going to find out exactly what happened, that this was an act of terror, and I also said that we're going to hunt down those who committed this crime. And then a few days later, I was there greeting the caskets coming into Andrews Air Force Base and grieving with the families. And the suggestion that anybody in my team, whether the Secretary of State, our UN ambassador, anybody on my team would play politics or mislead when we've lost 4 of our own, Governor, is offensive. That's not what we do. That's not what I do as president. That's not what I do as commander-in-chief.
Governor, if you want to reply just quickly to this, please.
I certainly do. I think it's interesting. The president just said something which is that on the day after the attack, he went in the Rose Garden and said that this was an act of terror. That's what I said. You said in the Rose Garden, the day after the attack, it was an act of terror. It was not a spontaneous demonstration. Is that what you're saying?
Please proceed, Governor.
I want to make sure we get that for the record, because it took the president 14 days before he called the attack in Benghazi an act of terror.
Get the transcript.
He did, in fact, sir. So let me call it an act of terror.
Can you say that a little louder, Candy?
He did call it an act of terror. It did as well take 2 weeks or so for the whole idea of there being a riot out there about this tape to come out. You're correct about that.
The administration indicated that this was a reaction to a video and was a spontaneous reaction.
They did.
It took them a long time to say this was a terrorist act by a terrorist group. And to suggest, am I incorrect in that regard? On Sunday, your secretary, the ambassador of the United Nations went on the Sunday television shows and spoke about how this was a spontaneous reaction.
I'm happy to have a longer conversation about foreign policy.
Absolutely, but I want to move you on, and also
I'm
people
happy to
can
do that
go
too.
to the transcripts.
I just want to make sure that
figure
all
out what
these
was said
wonderful
and
folks
when.
are going to have a chance to get some of their questions answered.
Because what I want to do, Mr. President, stand there for a second, because I want to introduce you to Nina Gonzalez, who brought up a question that we hear a lot, both over the internet and from this crowd.
President Obama, during the Democratic National Convention in 2008, you stated you wanted to keep AK-47s out of the hands of criminals. What has your administration done or plan to do to limit the availability of assault weapons?
We're a nation that believes in the Second Amendment, and I believe in the Second Amendment. We've got a long tradition of hunting and sportsmen and people who want to make sure they can protect themselves. But there have been too many instances during the course of my presidency where I've had to comfort families who've lost somebody, most recently out in Aurora. Just a couple of weeks ago, actually probably about a month, I saw a mother who I had met at the bedside of her son who had been shot in that theater. And her son had been shot through the head. And we spent some time and we said a prayer. And remarkably, about 2 months later, this young man and his mom showed up, and he looked unbelievable, good as new. But there were a lot of families who didn't have that good fortune and whose sons or daughters or husbands didn't survive. So my belief is that, A, we have to enforce the laws we've already got, make sure that we're keeping guns out of the hands of criminals, those who are mentally ill. We've done a much better job in terms of background checks, but we've got more to do when it comes to enforcement. But I also share your belief that weapons that were designed for soldiers in war theaters don't belong on our streets. And so what I'm trying to do is to get a broader conversation about how do we reduce the violence generally. Part of it is seeing if we can get an assault weapons ban reintroduced, but part of it is also looking at other sources of the violence. because frankly, in my hometown of Chicago, there's an awful lot of violence, and they're not using AK-47s, they're using cheap handguns. And so what can we do to intervene to make sure that young people have opportunity, that our schools are working, that if there's violence on the streets, that working with faith groups and law enforcement, we can catch it before it gets out of control. And so what I want is a comprehensive strategy. Part of it is seeing if we can get automatic weapons that kill folks in amazing numbers out of the hands of criminals and the mentally ill. But part of it is also going deeper and seeing if we can get into these communities and making sure we catch violent impulses before they occur.
Governor Romney, the question is about assault weapons, AK-47s.
Yeah, I'm not in favor of new pieces of legislation on guns and taking guns away or making certain guns illegal. We, of course, don't want to have automatic weapons, and that's already illegal in this country to have automatic weapons. What I believe is we have to do, as the President mentioned towards the end of his remarks there, which is to make enormous efforts to enforce the gun laws that we have and to change the culture of violence we have. And you ask, how are we going to do that? And there are a number of things. He mentioned good schools. I totally agree. We were able to drive our schools to be #1 in the nation in my state. And I believe if we do a better job in education, we'll give people the hope and opportunity they deserve, and perhaps less violence from that. But let me mention another thing, and that is parents. We need moms and dads helping raise kids. Wherever possible, the benefit of having 2 parents in the home, and that's not always possible. A lot of great single moms, single dads. But gosh, to tell our kids that before they have babies, they ought to think about getting married to someone, that's a great idea. Because if there's a 2-parent family, the prospect of living in poverty goes down dramatically. The opportunities that the child will be able to achieve increase dramatically. So we can make changes in the way our culture works to help bring people away from violence and give them opportunity and bring them in the American system. The greatest failure we've had with regards to gun violence in some respects is what is known as Fast and Furious, which was a program under this administration, and how it worked exactly, I think we don't know precisely, but where thousands of automatic and AK-47 type weapons were given to people that ultimately gave them to drug lords. They used those weapons against their own citizens and killed Americans with them. And this was a program of the government. For what purpose it was put in place, I can't imagine. But it's one of the great tragedies related to violence in our society, which has occurred during this administration, which I think the American people would like to understand fully. It's been investigated to a degree, but the administration has carried out executive privilege to prevent all the information from coming out. I'd like to understand who it was that did this, what the idea was behind it, why it led to the violence. Thousands of guns going to Mexican drug lords.
Governor, if I could, the question was about these assault weapons that once were banned and are no longer banned. I know that you signed an assault weapons ban when you were in Massachusetts. Obviously, with this question, you no longer do support that. Why is that, given the kind of violence that we see sometimes with these mass killings? Why is that you've changed your mind?
Well, Candy, actually, in my state, the pro-gun folks and the anti-gun folks came together and put together a piece of legislation. And it's referred to as an assault weapon ban, but it had, at the signing of the bill, both the pro-gun and the anti-gun people came together because it provided opportunities for both that both wanted. There were hunting opportunities, for instance, that hadn't previously been available and so forth. So it was a mutually agreed upon piece of legislation. That's what we need more of, Candy. What we have right now in Washington is a place that's gridlocked.
So if you could get people to agree to it, you'd be for it.
We haven't had the leadership in Washington to work on a bipartisan basis. I was able to do that in my state and bring these two together.
Quickly, Mr. President.
First of all, I think Governor Romney was for an assault weapons ban before he was against it. And he said that the reason he changed his mind was in part because he was seeking the endorsement of the National Rifle Association. So that's on the record. But I think that one area we agree on is the importance of parents and the importance of schools. Because I do believe that if our young people have opportunity, then they're less likely to engage in these kinds of violent acts. We're not going to eliminate everybody who is mentally disturbed and we've got to make sure that they don't get weapons, but we can make a difference in terms of ensuring that every young person in America, regardless of where they come from, what they look like, have a chance to succeed. And Candy, we haven't had a chance to talk about education much, but I think it is very important to understand that the reforms we've put in place, working with 46 governors around the country, are seeing schools that are some of the ones that are the toughest for kids starting to succeed. We're starting to see gains in math and science. When it comes to community colleges, we are setting up programs, including with Nassau Community College, to retrain workers, including young people who may have dropped out of school but now are getting another chance, training them for the jobs that exist right now. And in fact, employers are looking for skilled workers. And so we're matching them up, giving them access to higher education. As I said, we have made sure that millions of young people are able to get an education that they weren't able to get before. Now,
Mr. President, I have to move you along here. You said you wanted to hear these questions, and we need to do it here.
Just one second, because this is important. This is part of the choice in this election. And when Governor Romney was asked whether hiring more teachers was important to growing our economy, Governor Romney said that doesn't grow our economy.
The question, of course, Mr. President, was guns here, so I need to move us along. You know, the question was guns, so let me.
But this will make a difference in terms of whether or not we can move this economy forward for these young people.
I understand.
And reduce our violence.
Okay, thank you so much. I want to ask Carol Goldberg to stand up because she gets to a question that both these men have been passionate about. It's for Governor Romney.
The outsourcing of American jobs overseas has taken a toll on our economy. What plans do you have to put back and keep jobs here in the United States?
Boy, great question, an important question, because you're absolutely right. And the place where we've seen manufacturing go has been China. China is now the largest manufacturer in the world. It used to be the United States of America. A lot of good people have lost jobs. 500,000 manufacturing jobs have been lost in the last 4 years. That's total over the last 4 years. One of the reasons for that is that people think it's more attractive in some cases to go offshore than to stay here. We have made it less attractive for enterprises to stay here than to go offshore from time to time. What I will do as president is make sure it's more attractive to come to America again. This is the way we're going to create jobs in this country. It's not by trickle-down government, saying we're going to take more money from people and hire more government workers, raise more taxes, put in place more regulations. Trickle-down government has never worked here, has never worked anywhere. I want to make America the most attractive place in the world for entrepreneurs, for small business, for big business, to invest and grow in America. Now, we're going to have to make sure that as we trade with other nations, that they play by the rules, and China hasn't. One of the reasons, or one of the ways they don't play by the rules, is artificially holding down the value of their currency. Because if they put their currency down low, that means their prices on their goods are low. And that makes them advantageous in the marketplace. We lose sales, and manufacturers here in the U.S. making the same products can't compete. China has been a currency manipulator for years and years and years. And the president has a regular opportunity to label them as a currency manipulator, but refuses to do so. On day one, I will label China a currency manipulator, which will allow me as president to be able to put in place, if necessary, tariffs where I believe that they are taking unfair advantage of our manufacturers. So we're going to make sure that people we trade with around the world play by the rules. But let me not just stop there. Don't forget, what's key to bringing back jobs here is not just finding someone else to punish. And I'm going to be strict with people who we trade with to make sure they follow the law and play by the rules. But it's also to make America the most attractive place in the world for businesses of all kinds. That's why I want to bring down the tax rates on small employers, big employers, so they want to be here. Canada's tax rate on companies is now 15%. Ours is 35%. So if you're starting a business, where would you rather start it? We have to be competitive if we're going to create more jobs here. Regulations have quadrupled. The rate of regulations quadrupled under this president. I talk to small businesses across the country. They say, we feel like we're under attack from our own government. I want to make sure that regulators see their job as encouraging small business, not crushing it. And there's no question but that Obamacare has been an extraordinary deterrent to enterprises of all kinds hiring people. My priority is making sure that we get more people hired. If we have more people hired, if we get back manufacturing jobs, if we get back all kinds of jobs into this country, then you're going to see rising incomes again. The reason incomes are down is because unemployment is so high. I know what it takes to get this to happen, and my plan will do that, and one part of it is to make sure that we keep China playing by the rules.
Mr. President, 2 minutes here because we are then going to go to our last question.
Okay. We need to create jobs here. And both Governor Romney and I agree, actually, that we should lower our corporate tax rate. It's too high. But there's a difference in terms of how we would do it. I want to close loopholes that allow companies to deduct expenses when they move to China, that allow them to profit offshore and not have to get taxed, so they have tax advantages offshore. All those changes in our tax code would make a difference. Now, Governor Romney actually wants to expand those tax breaks. One of his big ideas when it comes to corporate tax reform would be to say, if you invest overseas, you make profits overseas, you don't have to pay U.S. taxes. But of course, if you're a small business or a mom and pop business or a big business starting up here, you've got to pay even the reduced rate that Governor Romney's talking about. And it's estimated that that will create 800,000 new jobs. Problem is, they'll be in China or India or Germany. That's not the way we're going to create jobs here. The way we're going to create jobs here is not just to change our tax code, but also to double our exports. And we are on pace to double our exports. One of the commitments I made when I was president, that's creating tens of thousands of jobs all across the country. That's why we've kept on pushing trade deals, but trade deals that make sure that American workers and American businesses are getting a good deal. Now, Governor Romney talked about China, as I already indicated. In the private sector, Governor Romney's company invested in what were called pioneers of outsourcing. That's not my phrase. That's what reporters called it. And as far as currency manipulation, the currency's actually gone up 11% since I've been president because we have pushed them hard. And we've put unprecedented trade pressure on China. That's why exports have significantly increased under my presidency. That's going to help to create jobs here.
Mr. President, we have a really short time for a quick discussion here. iPad, the Macs, the iPhones, they are all manufactured in China. One of the major reasons is labor is so much cheaper here. How do you convince a great American company to bring that manufacturing back here?
The answer is very straightforward. We can compete with anyone in the world as long as the playing field is level. China's been cheating over the years. One, by holding down the value of their currency. Number two, by stealing our intellectual property, our designs, our patents, our technology. There's even an Apple store in China that's a counterfeit Apple store, selling counterfeit goods. They hack into our computers. We will have to have people play on a fair basis. That's number one. Number two, we have to make America the most attractive place for entrepreneurs, for people who want to expand a business. That's what brings jobs in. The president's characterization of my tax plan is completely false. Let me tell you.
Let me go to the president here because we really are running out of time. And the question is, can we ever get? We can't get wages like that. It can't be sustained here.
Candy, there's some jobs that are not going to come back because they're low-wage, low-skill jobs. I want high-wage, high-skill jobs. That's why we have to emphasize manufacturing. That's why we have to invest in advanced manufacturing. That's why we've got to make sure that we've got the best science and research in the world. And when we talk about deficits, if we're adding to our deficit for tax cuts for folks who don't need them, and we're cutting investments in research and science that will create the next Apple, create the next new innovation that will sell products around the world, we will lose that race. If we're not training engineers to make sure that they are equipped here in this country, then companies won't come here. Those investments are what's going to help to make sure that we continue to lead this world economy, not just next year, but 10 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now.
Thanks, Mr. President.
Government does not
Romney,
create jobs. Government does not
Governor
create
Romney,
jobs.
I want to introduce you to Barry Green because he's going to have the last question to you first.
Barry? Oh, there's Barry. Hi, Barry.
Hi, Governor. I think this is a tough question. Each of you What do you believe is the biggest misperception that the American people have about you as a man and a candidate? Using specific examples, can you take this opportunity to debunk that misperception and set us straight?
Thank you. And that's an opportunity for me, and I appreciate it. In the nature of a campaign, it seems that some campaigns are focused on attacking a person rather than prescribing their own future and the things they'd like to do. In the course of that, I think the president's campaign has tried to characterize me as someone who's very different than who I am. I care about 100% of the American people. I want 100% of the American people to have a bright and prosperous future. I care about our kids. I understand what it takes to make a bright and prosperous future for America again. I spent my life in the private sector, not in government. I'm a guy who wants to help with the experience I have, the American people. My passion probably flows from the fact that I believe in God, and I believe we're all children of the same God. I believe we have a responsibility to care for one another. I served as a missionary for my church. I served as a pastor in my congregation for about 10 years. I've sat across the table from people who were out of work and worked with them to try and find new work or to help them through tough times. I went to the Olympics when they were in trouble to try and get them on track. And as governor of my state, I was able to get 100% of my people insured, all my kids, about 98% of the adults. Was able also to get our schools ranked #1 in the nation, so 100% of our kids would have a bright opportunity for a future. I understand that I can get this country on track again. We don't have to settle for what we're going through. We don't have to settle for gasoline at $4. We don't have to settle for unemployment at a chronically high level. We don't have to settle for 47 million people on food stamps. We don't have to settle for 50% of kids coming out of college not able to get work. We don't have to settle for 23 million people struggling to find a good job. If I become president, I'll get America working again. I will get us on track to a balanced budget. The president hasn't. I will. I'll make sure we can reform Medicare and Social Security to preserve them for coming generations. The president said he would. He didn't.
Governor.
I'll get our incomes up. And by the way, I've done these things. I served as governor and showed I could get them done.
Mr. President, last 2 minutes belong to you.
Barry, I think a lot of this campaign, maybe over the last 4 years, has been devoted to this notion that I think government creates jobs, that somehow is the answer. That's not what I believe. I believe that the free enterprise system is the greatest engine of prosperity the world's ever known. I believe in self-reliance and individual initiative and risk takers being rewarded. But I also believe that everybody should have a fair shot. And everybody should do their fair share. And everybody should play by the same rules. Because that's how our economy has grown. That's how we built the world's greatest middle class. And that is part of what's at stake in this election. There's a fundamentally different vision about how we move our country forward. I believe Governor Romney is a good man. Loves his family, cares about his faith. But I also believe that when he said behind closed doors that 47% of the country consider themselves victims who refuse personal responsibility, think about who he was talking about. Folks on Social Security who've worked all their lives. Veterans who've sacrificed for this country. Students who are out there trying to hopefully advance their own dreams, but also this country's dreams. Soldiers who are overseas fighting for us right now. People who are working hard every day, paying payroll tax, gas taxes, but don't make enough income. And I want to fight for them. That's what I've been doing for the last 4 years, because if they succeed, I believe the country succeeds. And when my grandfather fought in World War II and he came back and he got a GI Bill and that allowed him to go to college, that wasn't a handout. That was something that advanced the entire country. And I want to make sure that the next generation has those same opportunities. That's why I'm asking for your vote, and that's why I'm asking for another 4 years.
President Obama, Governor Romney, thank you for being here tonight. On that note, we have come to an end of this town hall debate. Our thanks to the participants for their time and to the people of Hofstra University for their hospitality. The next and final debate takes place Monday night at Lynn University in Boca Raton, Florida. Don't forget to watch. Election Day is 3 weeks from today. Don't forget to vote. Good night.
Welcome back. The town hall debate has just wrapped up, and we've got a lot of analysis ahead. But first, let's look at an exchange between the candidates over Mitt Romney's tax plan. Here's President Obama.
We haven't heard from the governor any specifics beyond Big Bird and eliminating funding for Planned Parenthood in terms of how he pays for that.
And now Mitt Romney's response.
If somehow the numbers don't add up, would you be willing to look again at a 20%?
Well, of course they add up. I was someone who ran businesses for 25 years and balanced the budget. I ran the Olympics and balanced the budget. I ran the state of Massachusetts as a governor, to the extent any governor does, and balanced the budget all 4 years.
I'm back now with White House correspondent Jackie Combs and Romney reporter Michael Barbaro. So, a lot more direct engagement on both sides this time. To what extent do you think that the president accomplished what he set out to do tonight?
I think he did exactly what he wanted to do. In fact, I think he did better than I expected him to. He clearly gained confidence in the first minutes, and I think took some energy from the fact that Mitt Romney seemed to take too much to heart the good debating points he got for aggression in the first debate, and I think really sort of stepped over the line to the point where he was arguably showing disrespect for the president. And I think that the president saw that, and by early in the debate seemed to, just sort of relax. You could almost see him relax.
You saw it in his face.
Yeah.
So Michael, you said he seemed kind of peevish.
The word that came to my mind was peevish. There was this kind of clenched, both physically and otherwise, quality to his performance. He interrupted a great deal. It strikes me as strange, actually, because Governor Romney is one of the greatest embracers of rules of all kinds and decorum. Interrupting to reinforce the rules. It's my turn. It's my minute. There was some of this on both sides, but the overall kind of quality of the debate was that Governor Romney seemed bothered, annoyed, and I'm convinced that some viewers will probably take away from that that this was a lesser performance than last time.
And does that undercut what was maybe one of his biggest goals for tonight, which was to sort of enforce his empathy, his likability factor?
Yeah, we talked earlier this evening about how this was supposed to be the liberated Mitt Romney who didn't need to be doing the repair work, who could be selling his product, his plan. I think that there's going to be a little more repair work to be done. I think this wasn't the most likable Mitt Romney. It was a little more, Mitt Romney's never going to be rambunctious. He's far too decorous and well-behaved, but this was the closest he's come, certainly in one of these formal environments, to being kind of unplugged and almost too loose a version of Mitt Romney.
Right. I thought right out of the box on the very first question, which was from a first-time voter, a 20-year-old college student who was asking about, how to make college more affordable, accessible, and how to get a job. And it really played right to Mitt Romney's themes on the campaign trail about talking about. Yeah, and he immediately was effectively using an example of personalizing it with a young man he'd met on the campaign trail. We saw him do that in the first debate. And I thought, well, here he is. He's going to, there's going to be more of this again. He was going to show empathy. Then it's funny because he started talking about, well, we have to make it easier for more people to go to college. And I thought, why did he go there? That's just going to play right into President Obama's ability to come back and say, but you haven't, talked about anything to make it easier. But then President Obama missed his opportunity
there to say anything about Pell Grants.
Exactly, and he didn't say anything about Mitt Romney's comment, which he does use on the campaign trail, about how Mitt Romney once said, if you need, ask your parents for help.
Right.
I was going to say, I made a small list of there were some points where the president certainly might have pulled a punch or two, but the list of attacks that he leveled is long, and it's very serious. Yeah. From being Governor Romney, you said you were for assault ban gun before you were against it. Your pension is much bigger than mine. You made money even when you stripped companies at Bain. bringing up the investments he has in Chinese governments. You can't get tough on China, Governor Romney. You have too much personally at stake. It was a pretty relentless effort to turn the attack machine on Governor
Romney. A lot
Romney.
of references to Mitt Romney's personal wealth
Yes.
this time.
Right.
His tax rate, his income, and then Mitt Romney sort of falling into it with the reference to his own
Right,
blind
Mitt Romney
trust.
did it himself, exactly. And I thought was at the point where the one voter had a very good question. It was something that, has not been asked and was very pointed, asking Mitt Romney how he and President Bush are different. And, everybody in the audience when watching must have been waiting for that answer. And Mitt Romney says, well, he says he'd rather answer another question, the previous question. And so it just, what I was going to say about the missed opportunity the president had at the beginning, I agree with Michael. That was the corollary of that is, I thought, well, this is a bad sign for the night's debate for the president. But he went on, and I counted 10 things in which he came and pointed out inconsistencies that he mostly failed to do in the first debate, where inconsistencies between what Mitt Romney is saying now and what he said during the Republican primaries.
He also seemed, interestingly, somewhat more prepared for the George Bush question than Mitt Romney did.
Mm-hmm.
And he had this sort of way of saying, yeah, he's not George Bush. Here's all the ways that he's more extreme than George Bush.
Right.
And really pushing it onto social issues, which is clearly a button also that President Obama wanted to push tonight. He repeatedly talked about social issues and women voters. I think he said Planned Parenthood maybe like 5 times in this debate. But he talked about his daughters, he talked about his mother, he talked about his grandmother, he talked about the Little Ledbetter Act. I mean, there was just a constant sort of push to say women voters.
Do you think he's worried about those polls showing a
think-
little bit
do
of
you think
bleeding of women voters?
And that is not, of course, where I thought Governor Romney was most effective in his attacks were not on those issues. They were on economic issues. There was one particular kind of snippet where he talked about the number of people on food stamps, the unemployment rate not being at 5.4%, which he said the president promised it would be. He did not submit an immigration plan to the Congress the way Governor Romney said he promised to. And he had this very powerful quote, which is the middle class is being crushed and this president doesn't know what it takes. His argument throughout the night returned time and again to, I know what it takes. You might be a wonderful guy. You're really articulate, but you don't know what it takes. You don't have the experience.
Thanks, guys. We'll be back in a minute. Rick Burke is down in the newsroom with economics correspondent Catherine Rampell to fact-check an exchange between the candidates on their jobs plans. Rick?
Let's go right to the exchange where Romney starts talking about the 12 million jobs he says he would create.
We have not made the progress we need to make to put people back to work. That's why I put out a 5-point plan that gets America 12 million new jobs in 4 years and rising take-home pay.
When Governor Romney says he's got a 5-point plan, Governor Romney doesn't have a 5-point plan. He has a 1-point plan. And that plan is to make sure that folks at the top play by a different set of rules.
Catherine, we've heard the $12 million job creation figure before from Governor Romney. What's the basis for that figure?
Well, if you take it at its face value, it's actually not a very impressive number. There are a number of economic forecasters and actually government forecasters who have said that the economy is going to create 12 million jobs over the next 4 years, regardless of who is president, just sort of based on where policy is currently headed. Earlier this week, the Romney campaign was asked where they specifically came up with that number. Maybe the campaign was, or the candidate himself was suggesting that that under Romney's policies, the economy would create an additional 12 million jobs over that baseline of what we're already expected to add. And the campaign cited 3 different studies that were sort of cobbled together that were supposed to analyze different components of the governor's proposal, but they were all sort of problematic. 2 of the studies were about estimates over a longer time frame, not a 4-year estimate. There was one, for example, that said that Mr. Romney's his proposal would create about 7 million jobs, I believe it was, under his tax policy. But that was a 10-year figure, not a 4-year figure.
I didn't hear any figure like that from Obama. Has he been cautious about throwing out a number, job projections?
I think he's probably learned his lesson a little bit. In late 2008, his economic advisors put out this report that's kind of come to bite him in the butt, that estimated what job growth would look like and what the unemployment rate would look like under the stimulus and not under the stimulus. And that said that under the stimulus, the economy would never get an unemployment rate over 8%. Of course, we only just broke beneath 8% last month. So it seems like it's a little bit dangerous, as Obama has learned.
As we saw, which gave Romney ammunition tonight.
Right.
But if you listen to Romney, it's the job creation has been very limited, and and if you listen to Obama, he says, "Well, I inherited a bad situation. I've done well given the situation. It's not what we projected." Which one is telling the truth?
Well, if you look at the history of economic recoveries following financial crises, they're always very, very weak. There was actually a sort of a seminal work that was published a couple of years ago that looked at the record of financial crises, and it found that like over 10 years, it's always incredibly slow job growth, incredibly slow economic growth. And so by that standard, given the fact that we suffered this huge global financial crisis, we're actually about on par with what one would expect.
I see. It seemed like both candidates tonight really were reaching out to the middle class. If you're in the middle class, you felt loved tonight. Now, these 12 million jobs that are talked about, was that a direct appeal to the middle class? Are they middle class jobs?
I mean, Romney and Obama, for that matter, have not specifically said we're going to create this many jobs if you're in this income group and this many jobs in that income group. As we've discussed, it's dangerous enough to put out an overall number. I think the hope is that yes, the United States would create more middle income or higher income jobs, but actually if you look at what's happened in the last few years, the plurality of jobs that have been created since the economy sort of hit its nadir have been low income jobs.
And one last point, Obama had a clear line rehearsed that said, Romney has a 1-point plan for job creation. It's all aimed at the upper income ranges. Is that a fair attack or not?
I mean, obviously, Romney has a lot of different policies that he's put out. The one that is most closely associated with job growth, anyway, that he keeps bringing up is about tax policy. And there are a lot of reasons to think that Romney's tax proposal would disproportionately help the very rich. So in that respect, yes, there was some truth to that attack. But again, Romney has talked about educational reform and a bunch of other things that are not specifically aimed at the very rich.
Okay. Catherine, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Megan?
Thanks, Rick. For many viewers, the candidate's style and delivery is as important as what they say. Media coach Bill McGowan is here with his take on the candidates' performances. So, Bill, we sort of expected from this format that there would be less direct engagement between the candidates, but in fact, no, we got more.
It was rock'em sock'em robots. It was definitely much more heated, much more confrontational than I think anybody expected, and it was clear that the president came out tonight. He was not going to be a piñata. He was going to, fire back, and he did. And it seemed as though in doing so, I really thought he got under Mitt Romney's skin a bit.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because we were talking earlier about sort of whether Mitt Romney kind of went over the line, whether he took too much of the sort of bonus points he got from last time for being aggressive and sort of went over the line. Do you feel like he sort of encroached, like physically encroached upon the president a little bit too much?
I totally did. He seemed kind of petulant almost, and I felt as though in the last debate, Romney seemed so much more presidential while getting some hits in. And tonight, I felt like there was an opportunity for Romney to pull back a little bit. And instead, I feel like even he realized maybe a third of the way through the debate that maybe he went a little over the top because you could see him pull dramatically back.
Yeah, there were some confrontations, not just with President Obama, but even with the moderator. So I think we're going to look at a quick clip of that.
I got to move you along.
And
the next question is for you.
He actually got the first question, so I get the last question, last answer on that one.
Actually, in the follow-up, it doesn't quite work like that, but I'm going to give you a chance here.
3.5 million more jobs in this country. It's critical to our future.
Candy, we're going to move you along to
I'm used
taxes.
To being interrupted.
All right, we're going to move you both along to taxes over here.
So, Bill, what did you think about that whole quibbling over the rules thing?
It seemed very schoolboy childish to me that he was more concerned with the rules and an even divide of time. And then even later he barked at Candy saying, well, of course they add up, about his budget numbers or whatever it was. And I just thought he really seemed kind of rattled tonight, which was really bizarre.
Interesting that I thought the president, as Jackie was saying earlier, seemed like, particularly after the first question or two, he seemed to seem very much more relaxed. I mean, both sort of more animated, but more relaxed.
I thought the auto industry question really got Obama relaxed and in a groove. He seemed to totally hit stride there. But even in his facial expression when he came out, he looked pretty loose tonight, which is interesting because I think he had a lot of pressure on him. And I thought Romney looked tight coming out.
You saw a little bit in their facial expressions off camera,
Right.
which President Obama obviously had a really hard time with last time. There was a lot about him looking down, not making eye contact. This time he was sort of looking at Governor Romney, but had this kind of anodyne smile on his face.
Yeah, it was sort of a stoicism, a sort of a calm. And
a calm
he
smile.
also sort of had, he sort of also had projected up, he had sort of a physical engagement towards Romney instead of something that was more in retreat, which I thought was kind of interesting. But there was no flinching, no nodding over the negative stuff. He was much better tonight in that department.
Now, one thing that they both sort of were trying to do tonight was connect with voters. Do you think that they did that?
Bad. Neither one. I mean, I felt both of them missed this great opportunity to maybe even have a little give and take with the people asking the questions. And in fact, this was one area I thought the president did not do well on. I thought he greeted a lot of the questions with not a connection with the person, which I think he's been accused of doing, but with the beginning of a speech on the topic. And it lost this intimacy. The one exception was when the woman Lorraine was talking about immigration, and he said, I don't want my daughter or your daughter getting pulled over in question because they look different. And I thought that was a great moment. I think he should have done more of that.
Thanks a lot, Bill.
My pleasure.
Rick Burke is standing by with Jeremy Peters to talk about the exchange between the candidates on Detroit and the auto bailouts. Rick?
Let's go right to that exchange.
You took General Motors bankrupt. You took Chrysler bankrupt. So when you say that I wanted to take the auto industry bankrupt, you actually did. And I think it's important to know that that was a process that was necessary to get those companies back on their feet so they could start hiring more people. That was precisely what I recommended and ultimately what happened.
Let me give the president a chance to go ahead.
Candy, what Governor Romney said just isn't true. He wanted to take them into bankruptcy without providing them any way to stay open. And we would have lost 1 million jobs. And that, don't take my word for it, take the executives at GM and Chrysler, some of whom were Republicans, may even support Governor Romney.
Now, Jeremy, you're a former Detroit correspondent. You've written about the bailout. Who should we believe here?
Well, Romney took some liberties with the sequence of events. While the Detroit auto companies did eventually go bankrupt, which is what he argued in his op-ed, what he's not taking into account is the fact that if they had gone into bankruptcy in the manner in which he argued,
Which Romney argued,
they likely would have had to liquidate. At the time, in order to go into bankruptcy, they would have needed a lot of outside financing. But this was late 2008 when the financial markets had completely collapsed and no financing was available. Now, later on, the auto task force that was charged under President Obama with trying to arrange financing for the auto industry actually went to Bain Capital, the company that Mitt Romney helped found. And they said, would you invest in the auto industry? They said no. So that just shows you how tight the markets were at the time and how difficult financing was to come by.
Now, President Obama said tonight that if you asked auto company executives, they would say that Mitt Romney did not want to save them. Is that what they say? Is that true?
I don't know how many of them feel like Mitt Romney turned their back on them, but I do know that they feel like if the course that they had followed when Mitt Romney suggested they follow it had actually gone through, that they would be out of business right now.
Now, we've heard different sides of Mitt Romney. We've heard the son of an auto chairman, chairman of General Motors, who cares about Detroit, who lived in Michigan, businessman. We hear that side of him, but then we also hear the side, tough businessman. I'm not going to let jobs slip away, but I'm not going to let these companies continue in a bad situation. I mean, which Romney should we believe?
Well, I think the Romney that you saw tonight was somebody who was struggling with the facts of a very difficult argument that he tried to make at one point. And the facts really don't line up for him when he's talking about taking the auto companies into bankruptcy.
Was his argument tonight different from what it had been?
No, the amazing thing is he's really stood by this. He said, yes, I said, let Detroit go bankrupt. Now, it's kind of unavoidable because the headline on the op-ed piece and everything in the story, the article as he wrote it, was saying these companies don't deserve any government
And that
help.
was the headline in the New York Times op-ed piece that he wrote.
Exactly, but he's being consistent here on one important level. He's saying, I think that the government needs to have a smaller role in American commerce. And at that point, what the auto companies were asking for was a bailout unlike any that the country had ever seen before.
But Obama's message tonight on this was that Obama is the job creator. Stick with me and there'll be more jobs in the auto industry and other places.
Right, and his argument was also that, look, this other guy who said, let Detroit go bankrupt, will turn his back on you, the middle-class American worker. And that's really what's at heart here, because those Detroit jobs that were saved because of the bailout were middle-class, blue-collar jobs.
Jeremy, thanks very much. Megan?
I'm joined once again by White House correspondent Jackie Combs and Romney reporter Michael Barbaro. Let's talk about a couple of things that were really important that didn't come up until the end. So let's start with Libya, which didn't come in until about an hour and 15 minutes into the debate. Interestingly, I think we all thought this was going to be maybe the toughest moment for the president. He seemed actually quite well prepared for this answer, didn't he?
He sure did. And to my amazement, he actually came out looking better than Mitt Romney, who, you know, they both had to be prepared for that question. Even though the president's been on the defense of his administration, has for
and they've had a terrible answer for a month.
Right, and in the just on the eve of this debate, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton took responsibility for it, and the president stepped in and said, no, essentially the buck stops with me. He took the issue and he took responsibility, and he really scored a few points against Mitt Romney for using the event to make his statement, as the president put it, even as the events were playing out, playing politics with it. And then Mitt Romney
an unforced error.
Yeah, had an unforced error by saying that the president did not call it an act of terror on the first day, which he, of course, did.
Yeah, the other thing that strikes you as you watch this is the powers of incumbency. The president looked so effortlessly, the president, talking about greeting coffins at the airport, talked about not playing politics. By the way, when you're running against the president, everything is political. So in a way, it's sort of a false argument. But when you are the president, you can accuse your opponent of playing politics with national security. So there's a lot of built-in advantages that he used, and he used them with a certain delicacy.
He also used his advantage that he's had in the polls on foreign policy to sort of lay out, here's my foreign policy record. I said we go after al-Qaeda, we did. I said we go after bin Laden, we did. I said we'd end the war in Iraq, and we did. And this is the thing that he used throughout the night, was he kept saying, you know, basically, I follow through with what I say. And to sort of drive home the idea, like, you don't know what this guy's going to do. It was a sort of double-edged sword where he was sort of saying, you know, you can't trust which Mitt Romney you're going to get. Whereas, like, he kept saying, what was the quote he had? What I've tried to do is be consistent. And he said it over and over again in various ways.
No matter what the subject.
I really want to go back to something that Jackie said. You know, when Mitt Romney announced on national television in a debate that President Obama didn't say the word terror in the Rose Garden and he got it wrong, that's a very big deal. When you're running for president and you're prepared for a debate and you claim something to not be the case and it is, that's a very memorable moment.
Especially when you're a candidate who's already criticized for not
exactly, and who's already on somewhat shaky ground given the quick politicized statement he gave on Libya. This was a serious gaffe.
And the moderator bucked up the president in saying that Mitt Romney was wrong. So
fulfilling the moderator's role of semi-fact checking the candidates. Another thing that, again, we've expected to come up in both debates, which didn't come up until the last question tonight, was the 47%. And interestingly, Mitt Romney raised it first, sort of implicitly, preemptively, saying, I'm a person who cares about the 100%. And then, of course, the president
it was a great question. The question from that gentleman in the end was, what are the greatest misperceptions about you? By the way, that's the 47% question. And Mitt Romney's response, as you said, preemptively was, I care about the 100%. Remember those extra 53% are the people he didn't bring up in that famous video. And he talked about two things that he doesn't normally talk about. Talked about health care. You know, how important it was that he got that done in Massachusetts.
Which he hardly ever
talks about. And again, he was saying, I'm empathetic, and he said specifically, I'm not the man that the president's campaign paints me as.
Right. And I thought that was an effective sort of answer, and it makes me wonder if his mentioning, though, that he's for the 100% of Americans finally got the president to say, "Oh, I need to talk about the 47%," or whether President Obama was just saving it to the end. Yeah, but he came back, and I think I was waiting for President Obama to talk about some personal misperception about him on a personal level. Silly me. I don't know why you have me on this show to talk about predictions or anything else. But I thought pretty effectively talked about the idea that he's this person who thinks the government can create jobs. Right. And he, and it gave him, and he segued right into his philosophy about, I'm a big believer in individual entrepreneurism and drive, but we need to have a government that makes sure everybody's getting a fair shot and playing by the rules.
Well, there were great questions in this debate. Number one great question was the difference between you, Mitt Romney, and George W. Bush. And the second one was giving these guys a chance to talk about all the things that they are described as that they think they're not. So I got to give a lot of credit to the people out there in Long Island tonight.
Shout out to Long Island. Thanks, guys. We'll be back in a minute. I'm going to send it over to Opinion now for a moment. Op-ed columnist Charles Blow is standing by with fellow columnist Ross Douthat for their reaction.
Thanks, Megan. So, Ross, I'm calling this one for Obama. How are you calling it?
I'll call it for Obama too. We can have a moment of bipartisanship.
Exactly.
I think Obama was substantially better than the last debate. I think Romney was marginally
both policy
worse.
and style, or how are you calling it?
More style. I think he was better on the attack than in the last debate. I think he was sort of more focused. I think he still has a sort of baseline problem that he gets very weak when he's asked to talk about what he's going to do in his second term. But I think he was much better at sort of.
What weak?
I mean that the president doesn't really have a second term agenda to speak of.
He actually tonight did lay out what, I mean, you may not agree with
Right,
me.
we're going to continue having manufacturing jobs. No, what he does is describe trends, right? He's like, we will continue to have this trend and continue to have that trend. But in terms of actual legislative goals, it's very thin.
Come on, Ross. I mean, look,
look, I'm telling you that I thought it was a narrow win for Obama. What happened to bipartisanship?
I'm going to take
You're
more.
going to take it
I don't
and
believe
run
it.
with
But listen, but what Romney does is give you magical math, right? So he keeps saying, I was in the private sector, and I know how to create jobs. But that's kind of like micro job creation. It's not really, countrywide kind of job creation.
And I thought Romney was weaker in that sense. I think last time, he has a very sort of general 5-point blueprint, but last time he did a good job of hammering away on those relatively specific points. And this time he did get trapped in that I know how to do it landscape.
Yes. Now let's move. I want to get to what I think is the biggest gaffe of the entire debate, which is this Benghazi question. When you have
you have the White House totally on the defensive. Exactly. They've fouled this up in all kinds of ways. Hillary Clinton is out there taking responsibility yesterday. Right. It's sort of a softball down the plate for Romney, and it was clearly his worst moment. He didn't know how to explain the dynamic. Right. Obama then did a good job of sort of playing the high dudgeon, how dare you question me in wartime card. Exactly. And then Romney had
and
that.
And he kept saying, I greet the Cassius coming back.
Right.
Which I thought was very clever.
It was very effective, yes. And then Romney had that awful moment where the moderator corrected him on what Obama had said in the Rose Garden. Now, I don't think it's a killer moment for Romney because, first of all,
Republicans. That's a killer moment. That's a killer moment.
It's not a killer moment in the sense that Libya.
And this is why it's a killer moment, Ross. Stop it. Right? Okay. I'm going to tell you why it's a killer moment.
Please do.
It's a killer moment because in the first debate, although Barack Obama did poorly, there was no moment you could pick out and say, this is a great campaign ad. This Benghazi screw-up, I think, is a great campaign ad when you are already being
well, let's see if they run it as a campaign ad. Look, this is not... If you think this campaign is going to turn on Benghazi, then I think...
Until 3 days ago, the Romney campaign was going to turn on Benghazi.
The Romney campaign liked to push the idea that Benghazi, would be... But they weren't... That wasn't where they were actually gaining momentum in the polls. Now, look, again, Charles, I'm giving you something. It was a big swing and a miss by Romney. I'm just saying that as world historical gaffes go, I think most voters were like, Libya, Obama screwed something up. Oh, Romney's blowing it. He sounds foolish. But let's get back to the economy. That's my totally uninformed guess of how, the average American reacted.
Now this I also thought was clever, right? So Barack Obama does not bring up the 47% all evening.
Right. He saved it.
Romney's sense is, this guy's actually not going to bring this up. So I'm going to offer my defense
Oh,
anyway.
See, no,
So he
I
said,
thought that was the opposite. I thought Romney knew it was coming. He absolutely knew that if there was a moment when Obama was going to pull it, it was because he had the last word, so he'd use it and it would go unrebutted. Because I think if Obama had brought it up earlier, Romney could have said, that was a mistake, I apologize, etc. So Obama saves it, and Romney, by bringing it up himself, was trying to preempt it. I think it was calculated.
So generous. He didn't calculate that. He thought that he was not going to bring it up. He thought.
And so he thought he would bring it up himself?
No, he thought he was going to. He thought he was going to miss it. He knew he had to address this issue. So he said. So this was his last time to speak.
I
directly.
think my interpretation is much more plausible, Charles.
You always think your interpretation is better.
Well, you know, I mean, I do what I can.
But I thought it was very crafty. Obama wasted the last 2 minutes. He has no chance to respond, and he brings up the 47%, and he says, this is the guy who said that. You don't like that. Even though the dials,
the dials weren't that
CNN,
great.
I saw the dials, they didn't work out there. But I think that in general, I think that it works.
I think Obama is better. I think in general, Obama is much better on the attack on specifics, saying this about Medicare, this about education, and so on, than he is on. I think the 47% thing is a killer for Romney, but not when it's Obama pushing it. I think it's better. I think Obama's most effective moments were earlier.
I think it's better when Mitt Romney says it to like a secret
That
gathering.
is, in fact, the most effective.
So good.
With like Mr. Burns
So
from The Simpsons in the front row.
Yep. So to wrap this up, you give this to Obama, and you believe that Mitt Romney performed disastrously, right?
I'll give you 1 for 2.
Okay,
1
there
for
you
2,
go.
Charles.
And that's it for us. Back to you, Megan.
For a look at how social media is responding to tonight's debate, I'm joined by Andrew Fitzgerald, the manager of editorial programming at Twitter. So, Andrew, what lit it up tonight? What was the big bird of the night on Twitter?
Well, the biggest spike in conversation that we saw tonight, which was around 109,000 tweets per minute, was when Governor Romney was asked a question about immigration. But a lot of the other spikes that we saw were around confrontation. So moments when Governor Romney or the president sort of got messed it up with each other, or even with the moderator. And so the second highest of the night at 108,000 tweets per minute was when the president said to Governor Romney, you're the last person to get tough on China. Now, the fun topic of the evening.
The big bird of the evening.
The big bird of the evening looks like it was binders full of women.
I saw a lot of binders full of women in my stream.
Right, and of course generated its own new account, Romney's Binders, and looks like there were approximately 54,000 mentions of the word binders.
Let's look at a little bit of that clip and see what we're talking about. Oh, it looks like we actually don't have that clip. So we'll just keep going. How did the traffic in this debate compare to both the first presidential debate and the vice presidential debate?
So total tweets sent about this debate were a little bit lower than the first presidential debate. The first one was at about 10 million tweets sent, and this one is just over 8.5 million tweets sent.
Still pretty high.
But
how did the beeps do?
About 3.5 million tweets sent.
Big fall off there.
Yeah, this one is quite a bit higher than the vice presidential debate.
And then, was there something like the first presidential debate where there was like a clear winner called on Twitter, or was it more equivocal in the way that the vice presidential debate was?
It seems like this one was pretty even. So the Twitter political index numbers have been released for the evening, and it looks like both the candidates saw approximately a 4-point increase in positive sentiment in the discussion around them on Twitter. And so it looks like both of them kind of drove a lot of conversation and about the same amount of positive conversation.
Let's talk about the general topics that drove a lot of traffic on Twitter. What were the big topics of the night?
So it looks like the biggest topics of the evening were the economy was about a third of the total
Perhaps
conversation.
not a big surprise.
Not a big surprise. And then foreign policy, even though it sort of came late.
And there was really basically Libya.
Yeah.
That was kind of the foreign policy, and it actually was 75 minutes in, so that's kind of surprising.
Yeah. But that Libya exchange did drive a lot of conversation on Twitter.
And then I see it even outdid taxes, so that's pretty
right.
good. How about the moderator? In the last couple of debates, obviously primarily the first debate, the moderator has been a huge subject of Twitter traffic. Did we see that with Candy Crowley?
We saw a bit of conversation about Candy Crowley, particularly at the moments when she would sort of ask the candidates to shorten their answers, or when the moment when she corrected Governor Romney inspired a lot of conversation on Twitter.
Thanks, Andrew. We'll be watching for next time. Rick Burke is down in the newsroom, this time with Assistant Managing Editor Susan Shira to talk about an exchange over Libya. Rick?
Susan, it took a while to get to foreign policy, but when we got there, it was pretty intense over Libya. Can you talk a little about the back and forth?
Yes, I mean, this was the opportunity for Governor Romney to press his fairly successful attack on the Obama administration about the conflicting stories that the administration spokesmen have told about what happened in Libya. But there was a kind of unexpected twist to that, which is that President Obama cited the fact that on the day after the attack, he went to the Rose Garden and he did refer to the attack as an act of terror. And Governor Romney didn't seem to remember or know that that had happened, so that he was sort of pressing his case, and President Obama was saying, no, 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 and then Candy Crowley jumped in and said, well, technically that's right, which has brought her some criticism.
And she gave the president credibility by sort of siding with him on that and the one time in the debate. But as you and I look back at that transcript, and it wasn't, he didn't say it was a terrorist attack, it was more of a vague quote.
Yeah, he said no acts of terror will stand, something along those lines. And I think that he did, technically label it a terrorist act, but he was not terribly strong. He didn't dwell on it, and the administration did continue to have a kind of shifting account of what happened for a considerable period of time, which is the vulnerability the Republicans have been seizing on. On the other hand, I think President Obama had an effective moment when he, in very emotional terms, said that it was offensive to think that he or his staff would play politics with an act that had cost the lives of men and women that he had known and that and whose caskets he had to greet. So
I thought that was the most intense moment of the debate, emotional moment of the debate, where Obama seemed angry at Romney.
Yes, I think that that came through as very forceful. Of course, you can quibble with it because there's still a lot that's unknown and that's not fully explained to the American public. And I think that President Obama, that was a very effective moment for him, but I also think he could have made some other points that he did not. When all the discussion happened about how there were requests for extra security, I think that it's clear there were security lapses. At the same time, President Obama could have pointed out that the requests for more security were actually for the embassy in Tripoli, not the consulate in Benghazi, and involved a handful of people that the State Department testified could not have prevented such an attack. But I think the broader question, when you rise above the technicalities, is we're still trying to understand all the facts behind this attack, and it's clear it's going to remain a campaign issue.
But there's also the emotional question where Romney still tried to paint Obama as going to events in Nevada right after the attacks and not really caring. And then you hear Obama say, well, I was in the Rose Garden. I was very concerned. I went to the Air Force Base to wait for the bodies to come home. So is that just theatrics on both sides?
You know, I think it's a good question. I'm curious to see how voters will respond to it. I think that there was a moment where Governor Romney was trying to make a repeated point that President Obama has failed as a leader for setting coherent and effective policy in the Mideast. This has been a campaign theme that he's tried to press. At the same time, he elicited from President Obama a very strong response, and this is from a guy who has a pretty cool affect and who doesn't usually get emotion. And in that sense, that could be a telegenic moment.
So it's really about leadership on foreign policy and who's a strong, trustworthy commander-in-chief in many ways.
I think that's the essence of what voters will have to decide after watching, the debate and the campaign.
Susan, thanks very much. Megan?
Before we go, some closing thoughts from Michael Barbaro and Jackie Combs. I want one takeaway from each of you. Jackie?
I think the president is a relieved man tonight. If there had been a repeat of his performance in the first debate, it could have arguably been fatal to his reelection hopes. I think he pretty much performed like he needed to tonight, and on to the last debate on foreign policy. And he did pretty well with the Libya question after being days on the defensive.
Michael?
I don't know that this changes anything in the trajectory of this race, but what it does is it stanches an important narrative. It stops the narrative of kind of some bottom falling out under President Obama in the polls. You know, what's going to be funny is tomorrow morning, Joe Biden's going to be on all the shows, and in the SNL version of those, he'll say, didn't Mitt Romney watch me and see that I was annoying to some people, and then he went and did the same thing? But I think what Romney's people will do, if history is any lesson, is they will carefully scrutinize this. They will have him watch it. They will watch it carefully, and they will make sure that he has as close to a flawless third debate as possible. He is nothing if not a self-correcting, diligent student of himself.
Thanks, guys. I will see you both here next week for the final debate. That's all for tonight. Stay with us online for more on Campaign 2012. I'm Megan Lieberman. Thanks for watching.